Bacon and Kyra, a love story, written by Barron, narration by Jessica Ann Bogart. Prologue. I will tell you about a delicatessen on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in 1978, because the marriage that is now 37 years old, in 2026, with 2 grown children and 3 miniature horses and a 40-acre farm in northwestern Connecticut, started in that delicatessen, 10 years before the bride and groom had any idea it had started. The bride was 12 years old. She was wearing a corduroy skirt. She had been brought to a matinee performance that afternoon by her mother in a small theater off the Bowery of a Lanford Wilson play whose name she would not be able to remember in 2026, but whose lead actor she would remember for the rest of her life. The lead actor was 19 years old. He had a Philadelphia accent, a head of hair the press would later describe as cinema grade, and a habit, between the matinee and the evening performance, of walking to a delicatessen around the corner from the theater for a sandwich and a coffee. The bride, in her corduroy skirt, walked up to the lead actor in the delicatessen. The bride said, "Hi, I liked you in the play." The lead actor, who has, in the years since, told this story about 600 times in interviews, said the only thing a tired actor between performances knows how to say to a 12-year-old in a deli. The lead actor said, "Thanks, sweetie." The bride remembered the moment. The lead actor did not. I want to tell you what happened 9.5 years later, because the 9.5-year gap is, in this love story, the secret. The secret is that 2 people in 1978 in a Manhattan delicatessen made a small, completely unremarkable contact in which one of them paid attention to the other and the other one paid attention only to the sandwich. The secret is that in 1987, in a rehearsal hall on West 46th Street in Manhattan, the 2 of them met again, and the woman, now 22, sat across from the man, now 29, and looked at his face, and made, in her head, in the half-second she had before the table read began, a list of 3 things. The first thing on the list was, "He has aged better than I expected." The second thing on the list was, "He has no idea who I am." The third thing on the list was, "I am going to marry this man." The third thing was correct. I want you to know what this story is and what it is not. This is not a story about Footloose. Footloose was, in 1984, the role that made him famous, and the role he has, in the 42 years since, mostly tried to take in stride. Footloose is, in this book, a single chapter at the door, not the foundation of the house. This is not a story about the closer. The closer was, between 2005 and 2012, the 7-year primetime procedural that gave her a Golden Globe, an Emmy, and the kind of household name recognition only a long-running television character can confer. The closer is, in this book, a single chapter in the middle, not the spine. This is not a story about Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff was, in December of 2008, the night their accountant called the house and told them on the phone that most of the money they had ever earned was gone. Bernie Madoff is, in this book, the hardest week of the marriage and a chapter in the late 3rd act, and it is not the moral of the marriage. This is a story about a 40-acre farm in Sharon, Connecticut, that one of them bought, alone, in 1983, before he had a wife. This is a story about a 4-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan that one of them has lived in continuously since 1976. This is a story about 2 grown children who are, in 2026, both working artists in their own right, both in the 40 blocks of Manhattan their parents raised them in. This is a story about 38 years of two people in 3 houses on 2 coasts, with 3 miniature horses and 4 goats and 2 pigs and 1 band that has been touring 12 studio albums for 32 years, choosing each other. If you are a fan of either of them, settle in. There is a chair for you here. If you are a stranger to both of them, settle in. There is a chair for you here. The story is the same in either chair. The question the story is answering is the only question worth answering. In any love story in this series, can 2 people in a delicatessen in 1978 make a contact that becomes, 10 years later, a marriage, and 40 years later, a farm? I will tell you what I think the answer is. The answer is yes, if both of them, on the way to the deli that day, were already the people they were going to be. A word before. This book is inspired by publicly available material about real people. The interior of every conversation reproduced here has been dramatized in the spirit of who Kevin Bacon and Kyra Sedgwick have repeatedly told the public they are. No scandal has been invented. No infidelity has been invented. No abuse has been invented. Where the public record has been silent, the narrative has been softened, omitted, or generalized. Every direct quote in this book that is attributed to a real public moment was sourced from a dated public record interview, award speech, podcast appearance, or social media post by the principals themselves. Every other interior moment is the writer's reverent imagining of what a kind man and a kind woman, who have each said, in many ways and for many years, that they like each other, might say to each other when the cameras are off. Welcome, Part 1. Before. Chapter 1. Kyra, the girl in the corduroy skirt. I want to start in 1978, in a delicatessen on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, in a corduroy skirt that I had picked out that morning at the urging of my mother, because we were going to see a play. We saw a great many plays, my mother and I. My mother was, in 1978, a speech teacher and an educational therapist, and she believed with the conviction of a woman who had been raised in a German-Jewish family of educators that a child who was sat through enough Lanford Wilson and Sam Shepard and Eugene O'Neill before the age of 14 was a child who would, by 20, have the equipment to be a person in a room. I had the equipment. I had also, by 12, decided that I was going to be an actress. I had decided this in spite of my father, who was, in 1978, a venture capitalist on a Yankee family tree that included a Massachusetts judge, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and the founder of the Groton School. My father had, by my 12th birthday, made a series of small, dignified inquiries as to whether I might consider instead a profession in publishing or in education. My father had been raised to believe that the Sedgwicks did one of 3 things. They wrote, they taught, they sat in the United States Senate. My father had very generously, by my 12th birthday, expanded the list to include the law. I had taken the expanded list. I had set it down on the kitchen counter. I had said, in my exact voice, in the voice of the 12-year-old I was, "Daddy, I am going to be an actress. Daddy, I love you. I am still going to be an actress." My father had laughed. My father, like every Sedgwick man before him, was very good at the dignified, slightly defeated laugh. I want to tell you what happened in the deli. I had been to the matinee. The matinee was a Lanford Wilson play. The play had 4 actors in it. One of the actors was a man, on the stage for 2 hours, in jeans and a flannel shirt, and a head of hair my mother, in the cab home, would describe as the head of hair of an Old Testament prophet. The actor was 19. He was, on the stage, electric. He had, in the second act, a 12-line monologue that I, in my corduroy skirt, in row K, did not blink for. I leaned forward in my seat. My mother next to me leaned forward too. The man in the row in front of us turned around, after the monologue, and gave us the soft, "I saw that too" smile a stranger gives a stranger in a theater that has just done its job. We left the theater at 5. We walked 4 blocks to a delicatessen my mother liked, because my mother liked delicatessens, and because the delicatessen was halfway between the theater and the cab. My mother was, in another half hour, going to put me in to send me back to New Jersey, where I was, on Sunday nights, due at my father's house. The delicatessen had a counter. The delicatessen had a man behind the counter. The delicatessen had, at the counter, in profile, a young man in jeans and a flannel shirt, ordering a sandwich. I knew, in the half-second I saw the profile, who he was. I knew because I had been leaning forward at him in row K for 2 hours. I walked over. I tapped him on the elbow. I said, in the only voice a 12-year-old has for an actor she has just seen on stage, "Hi, I liked you in the play." He turned. He looked at me. He had blue eyes. He had blue eyes that were, at 5:20 in the afternoon, between performances, in profile, on a Sunday in 1978, the eyes of a young man who was tired in the way only an actor between performances is tired. He said, in the only voice a tired actor between performances has for a 12-year-old in a deli, he said, "Thanks, sweetie." He turned back to the counter. I went back to my mother who had watched the entire exchange and who was, in 1978, a woman in her early 40s with the patient observation of a woman who taught children to speak for a living, said in her voice, in the cab, on the way to my father's house, "Honey, whoever that was, you are going to remember him. I want to give you my mother's full name, because my mother is going to be quoted again in this book, and the quoting is going to require an introduction. My mother is Patricia, born Rosenwald, of Manhattan and of New Jersey, and, in some technical and inherited sense, of Frankfurt am Main, where her grandfather's family had lived before they had been put on a boat in 1878. My mother had been raised on the kind of Jewish ethical seriousness that holds, in its small print, that paying attention to a stranger is, on every Sunday afternoon, the actual job. My mother paid attention to me. My mother paid attention to the deli counter. My mother had, by the end of the cab ride, stored away in her own mind, with no fanfare and no agenda, the face of the actor in the deli. The actor in the deli was Kevin Bacon. The actor in the deli, 10 years later, in the spring of 1987, in a rehearsal hall on West 46th Street, would walk into a table read for the PBS television adaptation of a Lanford Wilson play called Lemon Sky, and would sit down across from a 22-year-old actress in a black turtleneck, and would not, for the first 3 lines of his role, look up from the script. The 22-year-old actress would look up first. The 22-year-old actress would say, in her exact voice, "Kevin, we have met before." He would say, "We have." He would say, in a voice that was, by then, the voice of a man who had just finished a very busy decade, "I do not, in any way, remember meeting you." The actress would smile. The actress would say, "I do not blame you." The actress would say, "I am going to give you the rest of your life to make up for it." He has been, in the years since, very generously, making up for it. Chapter 2. Kevin, the youngest of 6 in Philadelphia. I want to start in Philadelphia, on a row house street in the center city of 1965, in a household that contained 2 parents, 6 children, and a piano in the living room that was, on most afternoons, the loudest thing in the house. I am the youngest of 6. I have 1 older brother, Michael, and 4 older sisters, Kyra, Eleanor, Karen, and Hilda. I want to give you the Reynolds-style brothers count, because my marriage chapter, in some ways, started with a brother who taught me how to play guitar before I could read. Michael is 6 years older. Michael was, in 1965, 12 years old, with a guitar around his neck and a hairstyle that made him look exactly like the 3rd Beatle. I was the kid in the corner of the living room watching Michael play. I was, in some way, his audience for 15 years, before I was anyone else's. My father was Edmund Bacon. I am going to give you my father's full title, because my father is going to come up in interviews about me for the rest of my life. And the title is the title. Edmund Bacon was the urban planner of Philadelphia from 1949 to 1970. He has been called the father of modern Philadelphia. There is, in the city, on a wall in the lobby of City Hall, a small bronze plaque that has his name on it. There is also, in our family, a very specific cultural inheritance, which is the cultural inheritance of being the youngest child of a man whose name is on a bronze plaque on the lobby wall of City Hall, in the city in which you are trying to grow up. I love my father. I want that on the record. My father was, in his own way, in his own register, in his own decade, a great and serious and idealistic American. My father, in his prime, in the middle of the 20th century, had walked the city of Philadelphia with a notebook and had imagined, on paper, with very fine handwriting, a city in which children could play in the parks and adults could walk to work and the trains could carry the city to itself. My father was an idealist. My father was also, in our living room, in the evenings, the man whose dignity, very visibly, took up more space in the room than mine. I learned, in our living room, in the evenings, that the way a youngest child gets oxygen in a room with a great man in it is to make the great man laugh. I made my father laugh. I made him laugh with impressions. I made him laugh with songs. I made him laugh by, at 6, doing what I would, 3 decades later, do for a living, which is to be a small attention-getting machine in the corner of the room, with my hair just a little too long and the timing exactly right. My father laughed. My father, in those moments, in our living room in 1965, looked at me with the look that every great man in every living room of the 20th century has, on at least one Sunday, given the youngest child. The look said, "You are something else." The look said, "Whatever you are not me." I was not him. I was, however, going to be a working actor. I left Philadelphia at 16. I want you to understand the size of that sentence in the year 1974. I left a household with a famous father and a teacher mother and 4 older sisters and 1 older brother, and moved, alone, to a single room on a 4th floor in the West Village of Manhattan, with the rent paid by a small grant my mother had pulled from a fund I will not name, because the fund is no longer her fund, and the people who run it are not, this minute, any of my business. I went to Circle in the Square Theater School. I went on weekend nights to plays. I waited on tables. I lived for 2 years on grilled cheese sandwiches and the kindness of an older actor who has, in the years since, also become a friend, and who, also, will not be named in this paragraph, because the older actor likes his privacy, and earned it. I want to give you the night the deli happened, because the deli, in this book, is the moment that is in 1978, not 1974. I was 19. I had a part in a Lanford Wilson play, off-Broadway, in a small theater on the Bowery. I was making, in 1978 dollars, a number I will not repeat, because the number, even adjusted for inflation, would embarrass any serious union actor reading this book. The play was a 2-show day on Sundays. I had, between matinee and evening, 90 minutes. I had, every Sunday for the run, walked 4 blocks to a delicatessen, ordered the same sandwich, and sat at the counter, and not, for the entirety of the 90 minutes, talked to a single person. On a particular Sunday, in the early winter of 1978, a 12-year-old in a corduroy skirt walked up to my elbow at the counter and said, in the voice of a 12-year-old, that she had liked me in the play. I did the only thing a tired 19-year-old at a counter knows how to do. I said, "Thanks, sweetie." I turned back to the counter. I have, in the 48 years since, been forgiven for that sentence by exactly one person on the planet, who is the person the sentence was said to. I will tell you what I remember of the deli, which is almost nothing. I remember the sandwich. I remember the cup of coffee. I remember a small voice behind me that said something I did not turn fully around to receive. I remember a woman in a coat near the door, watching, with the patient observation of a woman who had been raised to pay attention. I remember the woman in the coat, with her hand on the back of the small voice, leaving the deli at 5:25. I remember none of the small voice's face. I remember none of the small voice's name. I would not learn either of them for 10 years. I would learn them, very specifically, in a rehearsal hall on West 46th Street in the spring of 1987, when an actress in a black turtleneck would sit down across from me at a table, read, would look me in the eye, and would say, in a voice that was, by then, the voice of a fully formed 22-year-old human being, "Kevin, we have met before. I want to tell you what I felt in the rehearsal hall when she said it. I felt, in plain English, embarrassed. I felt embarrassed because I did not in any way remember meeting her. I felt embarrassed because the 22-year-old human being in front of me had clearly remembered meeting me, and had clearly remembered for 10 years, and had clearly been carrying the meeting around with her for 10 years, and I had not. I felt also, in the same minute, the thing I want my son Travis to learn, in case he does not learn it elsewhere. I felt that the woman across from me had, in some way, been waiting to forgive me for a thing I had not yet asked to be forgiven for. I felt that the forgiveness was, in some way, available. I felt that the forgiveness was going to be a thing I was going to have to earn. I have been earning it every day for 39 years. I am still earning it. I want her to know I will keep earning it. Chapter 3. Kyra, a New York girl with a Yankee father and a Jewish mother. I want to give you the inheritance because the inheritance is, in some way, the spine of the marriage. The inheritance is, on my father's side, an old American Yankee family that arrived in Massachusetts in the 1600s and never quite left. The Sedgwick line includes Judge Theodore Sedgwick, who, in 1781, freed a woman named Mum Bet in a Massachusetts courthouse in the case that effectively ended slavery in that state. The Sedgwick line includes William Ellery, a signer of the Declaration of Independence. The Sedgwick line includes the founder of the Groton School, The Sedgwick line includes a great deal of New England Episcopalian hardness, a great deal of New England Episcopalian kindness, and a great deal of New England Episcopalian silence around the subject of feelings. The inheritance is, on my mother's side, a German Jewish family that arrived in New York in the 1870s, on the boat my mother told me every Sunday of my childhood that we did not get to forget. The Rosenwald line includes a great-grandfather who paid for an entire shtetl worth of his neighbors to come over after him. The Rosenwald line includes an aunt who, in 1938, pulled her own husband and her own children out of Frankfurt am Main on the last train. The Rosenwald line includes, in some way, the small ethical seriousness that a German Jewish family will hand down, generation after generation, in the form of a sentence at the table that says, "Pay attention to the stranger. I am the daughter of both lines. I want you to picture me, at 8, at a Thanksgiving table. The Thanksgiving table is on my father's side. The Thanksgiving table is at my grandfather's house in Connecticut, where we ate, every year, in front of a portrait of an ancestor who had served in the Civil War. The Thanksgiving table had on it 18 Sedgwicks. The Thanksgiving table had also on it my mother. My mother was, at the Thanksgiving table, the only Jew. My mother was, at the Thanksgiving table, also the only person from outside the East Coast Episcopalian seminary system. My mother was, at the Thanksgiving table, also the person who, in any given year, was most likely to ask, with very polite directness, whether the Sedgwicks were going to talk about anything that had happened that year. The Sedgwicks were not going to talk about anything that had happened that year. My mother, in the silence between the prayer and the carving of the turkey, would, every year, at the second most uncomfortable moment available, dryly raise the topic herself, knowing precisely what she was doing. The Sedgwicks would every year look at their plates. My mother would every year look at me with the small flash of a German Jewish woman who had successfully detonated a small social grenade at a Connecticut Thanksgiving table, and the two of us, in the look, would silently laugh. The look has, since I was 8, been the kind of look I would learn to give Bacon at our own kitchen table on the holidays, on the question my husband had, in the way of his own father's family, declined to ask. The Sedgwicks were going to talk about the meal. I learned, by 12, 2 things. The first thing was that 2 cultures in one body is a workable arrangement, but only if the body in question can hold both at once, without forcing one to apologize to the other. The second thing was that one of the cultures was going to be the one I wore in public, and the other was going to be the one I lived in privately. The Yankee was the public face. The Jewish was the interior. I think I have been a working actress in some way because of that arrangement. The acting profession is, for any kind of double-cultured kid, the place where the public face and the private face have permission to be on the same stage. I learned, as an actress, to use the Episcopalian dignity to get into the room and the German Jewish moral seriousness to do the work in the room. My parents divorced when I was very young. I do not want to dramatize it. The divorce was a divorce. There was no scandal. There was no fault. There was a marriage, and there was a different marriage. And the second marriage was the one my mother eventually ended up in. And the second marriage gave me my stepfather, who was a kind man, and it gave me my half-siblings, who include my brother Robert and my stepbrother Mike, and it gave me, in some way, a household on the west side of Manhattan in the late 70s, in which my mother and I, and the kids around us, were a unit. We were a unit. I want to give you a sentence my mother said to me. in 1978 at the breakfast table on the morning after the deli that I have, in the years since, said to my own daughter Sosie probably 1,000 times. The sentence was, "Honey, the men you remember are the men you have already forgiven." I want to walk you through what that sentence meant, because the sentence is, in some way, the most useful sentence anyone has ever said to me. The sentence meant that, by 12, I had a particular operating system about men. The operating system was, if a man on first encounter gave me, on the very first encounter, a small amount of disrespect, I had two choices. I could either decide on the spot that the man was not worth my future attention and erase him from the file, or I could decide on the spot that the man was worth the future attention and pre-forgive him for the small disrespect and store the file for later. The actor in the deli who had said "thanks, sweetie" to my 12-year-old face and turned back to his sandwich had, in any reasonable accounting of his own behavior on a Sunday afternoon between performances, given me a small amount of disrespect. I had pre-forgiven him. I had pre-forgiven him because of the way he had played the second act monologue. I had pre-forgiven him because of his eyes. I had pre-forgiven him because of the way the man in the row in front of us had turned around in the theater and given my mother and me the "I saw that too" smile. I had pre-forgiven him because in some way my mother's daughter had already filed him. I want to tell you what happened in 2024, on the day my husband, on a Today Show appearance, told the deli story for what may have been the 600th time. I was, in our Manhattan apartment, on the couch, watching the broadcast, with our daughter Sosie. Sosie was, at 32, a working actress in her own right. Sosie was, in some way, the inheritor of both lineages, the Yankee and the Jewish. Sosie watched her father on television tell the story. Sosie turned to me, in our living room, and said, in her voice, "Mom, he still does not understand why you remember, and he does not." I said, "Sweetheart, he understands. He just does not have the words for it." Sosie said, "What is the thing?" I said. "The thing is that I remember because I had already decided," Sosie said. "Decided what?" I said. "That he was the one." I said it on a Tuesday in 2024 in our Manhattan apartment in front of our 32-year-old actress daughter. I said it without dropping my voice. I said it without leaning towards Sosie. I said it the way you say a fact at a kitchen counter. The fact had been waiting in me, in some form, since 1978. The fact has not changed. The fact is, in 2026, the spine. Chapter 4. Kevin, the kid who ran away to Footloose. I want to tell you about Footloose because every interview I have ever done is going to ask me about Footloose, and the chapter exists in the manuscript, so the rest of the manuscript does not have to. Footloose came out in February of 1984. I was 25. I had, in the 4 years before Footloose, made a series of small films, of which Diner is the one I am proudest of, and which were the right films, in the right order, by accident, to put me in the position to be cast as Wren McCormick. I want you to understand, because the marriage chapter starts in 1987, and Footloose is in 1984, that there are 3 years between Footloose and Lemon Sky. 3 years is, in the life of any actor in his 20s, the difference between a kid who has been in a hit movie and a man who has been a working artist for half a decade. I needed those 3 years. I needed them because Footloose, on the day it came out, made me, very quickly, the kind of recognizable that the actor in the deli in 1978 had not been. The actor in the deli in 1978 had been a working off-Broadway actor with a head of hair and a regional accent. The actor in February of 1984 was a face on a poster on a wall in every American teenager's bedroom. The actor in February of 1984 was also in the dating economy of 1984 New York City, the kind of single 25-year-old male every parent in the city had told their daughter to be careful around. I was the kind of single 25-year-old male every parent in the city had told their daughter to be careful around. I want to be honest about that. I want to be honest also about the parties. I attended, by my own honest count, several of them in 1984. I was not, at any of them, my best self. I was, at most of them, the kid in the corner, with the second cheapest beer in his hand, attempting to look as if I had been somewhere this glamorous before. I was wrong about a great many things at 25. I was, by my own admission, terrible at small talk with the people who were running the city in those years. I made a fool of myself on at least one Tuesday in March by attempting to discuss the off-Broadway theater scene with a record executive who, as it turned out, did not know what off-Broadway was. The record executive, dryly, asked me whether I had ever been on Broadway proper. I said no. The record executive, in his voice, said, "Kid, get back to me." I laughed about it the next day. I have been laughing about it since. I dated a number of women between 1984 and 1987. I am not going to name any of them, because none of them, on the day they dated me, signed up to be a chapter in a marriage book by another author. I will say only that I was, in those years, fundamentally a young man trying to figure out which version of myself I was going to be when the first wave of fame settled. The first wave of fame had hit me at 25. The first wave of fame is, for any 25-year-old in any field, the version of fame that a 25-year-old does not, by definition, know what to do with. I made some mistakes. I will not list them. The list does not belong in this book. The list belongs in a different book that is not, in 2026, on the table. What I will tell you is that by the spring of 1987, I had, after 3 full years of post-Footloose Manhattan, exhausted myself. I had moved out of my apartment in the West Village and into the Upper West Side apartment that I have, in the 39 years since, never fully moved out of. I had taken the Lemon Sky job because the Lemon Sky job was a Lanford Wilson play. And a Lanford Wilson play, in any decade, is the kind of work that recalibrates an actor who has been, for 3 years, walking around in a Footloose poster. I needed the recalibration. I needed it because, on a soundstage at PBS in the spring of 1987, in a rehearsal hall on West 46th Street, I sat down at a table read, and the actress across from me, in a black turtleneck, looked me in the eye and said, "Kevin, we have met before. I want to tell you what I noticed in the half second before she said it. I noticed that she was not going to make me feel small for not remembering. I noticed it because the small smile she was wearing, before she said the line, was the smile of a woman who had decided in advance to spare me the embarrassment. I noticed it because the woman in front of me, at 22, was already operating with an emotional resource I had not, by 29, fully developed. I want to give you the credit list, because the credit list is the marriage. Most of what I have learned, in the years since the spring of 1987, about how to be a person in a room, I have learned from her. I had walked into that rehearsal hall in the spring of 1987, with an inheritance from my father that was a great deal of room presence and very little room listening. I would walk out of the marriage I am about to begin in 1988, with a much improved listening and a slightly reduced room presence. And I am, in 2026, a better person for the trade. I owed Kyra Sedgwick the listening. I owed Kyra Sedgwick the listening because Kyra Sedgwick had, in a deli in 1978, given me her full listening, and I had, in 1978, given her thanks, sweetie. I have been making up for thanks, sweetie, ever since. I will tell you what happened in the rehearsal hall very specifically, because the rehearsal hall is the formal start of the marriage. The director, at the head of the table, said, "Let's read from page 1. The director gestured to me to begin. I looked, before I began, across the table at the woman in the black turtleneck. The woman in the black turtleneck, for the half second before I began, did not break eye contact. I began. The reading went for 90 minutes. The reading was, by the standards of any cold table read of a Lanford Wilson play, a good reading. The reading was, by the standards of any standing down meeting of two actors who had, at that point, met 3 times in their 2 collective lives, the moment a third meeting was, very visibly, going to be needed. The third meeting happened on the same day. The third meeting was at a coffee shop on 8th Avenue at the end of the rehearsal day. The third meeting lasted 4 hours. The third meeting was, in the chronology of my life, the start of the marriage. I had a notebook in my bag. I took out the notebook. I wrote, on the first page of the notebook, in my own handwriting, a sentence I have in our apartment in 2026, in a drawer, on a piece of paper that has yellowed in the years since, but that has not in any way been thrown away. The sentence was, Kyra, Lemon Sky Table Red, April 1987. I do not write things down generally. I am not, by inheritance or by temperament, a journal keeper. I had not, in the previous 5 years of my professional life, written a single page in a notebook. I wrote that page. I wrote it because by the end of the 4-hour coffee, I knew. I knew the way the woman across from me had known 10 years earlier in a delicatessen on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in a corduroy skirt when she was 12. I knew 10 years late. I would tell her in the spring of 1987 that I knew on the third date in a Greek restaurant in the East Village in a sentence that, if she allows it, I will reproduce very briefly in the next chapter. I knew, I knew, I knew. Part 2, The Coming Together. Chapter 5, Kyra, the Greek restaurant in the East Village. I want to tell you about the third date, because the third date is the moment the marriage formally began. The first date, by my count, had been the 4-hour coffee at the diner on 8th Avenue at the end of the table read day. The second date had been a walk in Riverside Park on the following Saturday, in the kind of wind that, even in late April, makes you reconsider whether you are wearing enough layers. The third date, on the following Wednesday, was a Greek restaurant in the East Village that I want to name, because the restaurant is, in 2026, no longer there, and naming a restaurant that is no longer there is the only way to honor the fact that it ever was. The restaurant was called Periali. It was on West 20th Street, technically, and not in the East Village, which is what I get for trying to place a restaurant from memory, 39 years after the fact. Periali was a small, white-walled Greek restaurant with a courtyard, with a couple of olive trees in pots in the courtyard, and with a chef who, on Wednesday nights in 1987, did a roasted whole branzino that I, in 2026, am still chasing. I had ordered the branzino. I had ordered the branzino because Kevin at the table had said, in his voice, "Order what you want. Order the most expensive thing on the menu if you want. I had said, bacon. I want the branzino. I want to be honest about the branzino. The branzino, when it arrived, was the size of a forearm, with a head and with 2 eyes that had, very plainly, been looking at the sea earlier that morning. I had not, in my 22 years, ever deboned a whole fish. I could not, on the day, debone a whole fish, and I am not going to dramatize that I figured out how. I dryly said, "Bacon, I have no idea what to do with the head." Bacon laughed, took the plate, deboned my branzino with the patience of a man who had been raised in a row house with 5 older siblings, and had deboned a great many fish, and pushed the plate back to me. The 3rd date, by my count, had ended at the moment my future husband had deboned my fish. The marriage had, in some sense, formally begun. I want to give you the nickname, because the nickname is a piece of evidence I want on the public record. I have called Kevin Bacon by his last name since approximately the 3rd hour of the 4-hour coffee at the diner on 8th Avenue. I do not know why. I had been trying on the 1st date to call him Kevin, the way a person normally calls another person. By the 3rd hour, I had switched with no announcement to Bacon. By the 3rd date, I had not called him anything else. He, for his part, had taken to calling me K. He has been calling me K in private since approximately the same hour. The K is a 1-letter version of my first name. The K, in our marriage, is the only version of my name he uses when no other person is present. I have, in our apartment in 2026, a sweater he gave me in 2003, with the letter K embroidered on the inside of the collar. I wear the sweater on Sundays. I want to tell you what he said to me at Periali, because the sentence is the moment. I had eaten about 2/3 of the branzino. He had eaten his entire moussaka. We were on a 2nd carafe of the house wine, which was a tannic Greek red that nobody in 1987 was paying enough attention to know the name of, but that, in retrospect, I have spent 39 years trying to find again. The waiter had cleared the plates. We had, on the table, a small plate of grapes and a small ramekin of honey. We had a 10 p.m. silence, the silence 2 people on a 3rd date have when they are waiting to figure out whether one of them is going to say the next sentence. He said the next sentence. He said, "Kay, I want to tell you something." I said, "Bacon," he said. "Kay, I am not seeing anyone else," he said. "I have not seen anyone else in any meaningful way since the table read in April," he said. "I am 29. I am, by every Manhattan metric, 3 years overdue for a serious life. I would like, very much, to start the serious life with you." He said it in 3 sentences. He said each sentence and then took a breath. He had, I noticed, in the small space between the 2nd and the 3rd sentence, put his hand on the table, palm down, in a gesture I had not seen him make before. The gesture I would learn in the years since is his nervous gesture. The gesture has, in the years since, been at every kitchen table in our marriage on which a hard sentence was about to land. I want you to understand, because the moment is in some sense the load-bearing wall of the rest of this book, that he was 29 and I was 22, and a Greek restaurant in 1987 was not, in any reasonable accounting of how Manhattan dating happens at 22, a place where a man should propose on a 3rd date to start the serious life. He proposed it anyway. He had been forgiven for "Thanks, sweetie" before the coffee. He had been pre-forgiven by my mother in a cab in 1978. He was about to be officially forgiven by me at 22 at Periali on West 20th Street in late April of 1987. I said, Bacon. Yes, I said. I am not seeing anyone else either, I said. I have not been seeing anyone else in any meaningful way since the table read. I said, let us start the serious life. We had a fourth carafe. We did not that night sleep together. I want that on the record because the record matters. We had a Greek dinner and a serious life proposal and a fourth carafe, and we walked together to my apartment, which was on East 10th Street, and he kissed me at the door of the building, and he walked, alone, the 40 blocks home to the Upper West Side. He has told me since that the 40-block walk was the longest walk of his adult life, and that by the time he reached his door, his face was numb. I do not know if I believe him about the numb face. I believe him about everything else. We were engaged on December 24th, 1987. I will tell you about the engagement in the next chapter, because the engagement is his story to tell. He has earned it. I will tell you only what happened at Periali. I will tell you that, in some way, the engagement was already over by the end of the dinner. The marriage, of course, had not started yet. The marriage was going to start in September of 1988. The marriage was going to start in a small private ceremony with about 40 people. The marriage was going to start, in another sense, at every kitchen table in our marriage, at which his hand has gone palm down on the table to deliver a hard sentence. The marriage is, in 2026, the longest table in our family. Chapter 6. Kevin, Christmas Eve, 1987. I want to tell you about Christmas Eve of 1987. I had, by Christmas Eve, decided. I had decided in the kitchen of my Upper West Side apartment on the Sunday morning after the Greek restaurant dinner, while making her oatmeal in a pot that she had asked me, very politely, to make her oatmeal in. I had decided in the kitchen because the kitchen is the room in which a man who has had a 4-hour coffee and a Riverside Park walk and a Greek dinner with a woman who has unilaterally decided to call him by his last name decides what kind of life he is going to have. I had decided to spend the rest of my life with her. I want to be honest about the size of that decision in 1987. I had, at 29, 3 older siblings who were married. I had, at 29, 2 older siblings who were already raising children. I had, at 29, by Bacon family standards, been on the late side. The Bacons had, on the row house street in Center City, Philadelphia, had a strong unspoken theory about marriage, which was that you did it at 23 or 24, if at all possible, and you raised your kids in time to be a young grandparent, and you did not, in any case, leave it for the late 20s. I had left it for the late 20s. My mother, in her last visit to the Upper West Side apartment in 1986, had said to me, on a Sunday afternoon, in her voice, "Kevin, there is no rush, but there is also, my dear, no reason to wait if you have found what you have found. I had found what I had found. I want to give you dryly the size of the kitchen on Christmas Eve. The kitchen was a galley kitchen the size of a New York City galley kitchen. The pot was a single pot. The oatmeal had not, on Christmas Eve, gotten any better than the first oatmeal I had made her, on the first Sunday morning, 3 months earlier. I had, in 3 months of being given the same polite nod by a woman who was, by then, used to being told that her Sunday morning oatmeal had been excellent, learned exactly nothing about how to make oatmeal. I laughed at myself in the galley kitchen. I have, in the years since, made better oatmeal. I have not, in the years since, made oatmeal as good as a woman who had been made oatmeal in 2 cultural traditions knew how to make. I went, in early December of 1987 to a small jeweler on 47th Street that an actor friend of mine had recommended, and that I will not name because the actor friend is now dead and the jeweler is no longer there, and that the small respect I owe to both is to leave them in 1987. I bought a ring. The ring was simple. The ring was a half-carat stone in a 6-prong setting on a thin gold band. The ring was, in 1987 dollars, an amount I will not name, because the amount, on the day I bought it, was approximately 3 months of my pre-Footloose savings and 0 months of my post-Footloose savings, and I bought it specifically with the savings I had earned before the Footloose money came in, because I did not want, in any way, the ring to be a Footloose ring. I wanted the ring to be the ring of the actor in the deli. The ring was the ring of the actor in the deli. I wrapped the ring in tissue paper. I put the tissue paper in a small box. I put the small box in the inside pocket of a wool coat, which was the only coat I owned in the winter of 1987 that had an inside pocket. I want to give you Christmas Eve very specifically. Kay's family, on Christmas Eve, had, by tradition, a dinner in her mother's apartment on the Upper West Side. The dinner was a hybrid, Christmas Eve and Hanukkah leftovers dinner, because Kay's mother was Jewish, and Kay's stepfather by then was Jewish, and the Christmas Eve part of the evening was a polite gesture toward Kay's father's side of the family, which had a separate dinner the next night in Connecticut that we were also attending. Kay invited me. Kay had been inviting me to Sunday dinners at her mother's apartment for, by then, about 3 months. Kay's mother and stepfather had, very generously, made room for me at a table they had been making room for me at since October. I drove to West 86th Street. I had borrowed a car from a friend because the Manhattan cab math, with a wool coat and an inside pocket and a small box, was the kind of math I did not want to do on the night I was going to propose. I parked the car illegally on West 86th Street in a way that I am, in 2026, still receiving parking tickets for in old folders. I went up to the apartment. I want to tell you what happened at the dinner. The dinner was good. Kay's mother had made a brisket. Kay's stepfather had made a kugel. Kay's brother Robert, who was, by then, a working actor in his own right, had brought from his own apartment a tray of his roommate's homemade rugelach that the roommate, an Israeli woman named Naomi, had been making for the family for a decade. We had brisket, we had kugel, we had rugelach. We had, by 10 p.m., the kind of post-dinner kitchen counter family situation in which there are 3 or 4 conversations going at once, in which 2 cousins have, against all sense, started a small political argument in a corner, and in which the host, in this case Kay's mother, has begun the small evening end task of starting to put leftovers into Tupperware. Kay and I went out to the small balcony off the living room. The balcony was small. The balcony was, in late December of 1987, cold. The balcony had, on it, 2 folding chairs that Kay's mother had been promising to replace, that I had 3 weeks earlier said I would replace for her, that I had not, by Christmas Eve, replaced. We sat in the folding chairs. We had blankets. Kay had a glass of red wine. I had nothing in my hands except, in the inside pocket of my wool coat, a small box. I said, "Kay." She said, "Bacon." I said, "Kay." "The Sedgwicks have a Connecticut house I have not been to," she said. "Bacon." "We are going tomorrow," I said. "Kay." "The Bacons have a row house in Philadelphia I have been told you would be welcome at," she said. "Bacon." "I would like to see it," I said. "Kay." "The Sedgwicks and the Bacons have a meeting in their immediate future," she said. "Bacon." "They have met." "We have had 4 meetings," I said. Kay, I mean a different kind of meeting. I took the small box out of the inside pocket. I held it in my hand for a beat. I want to tell you the next sentence I said, because the next sentence I said was, by the standards of every romantic comedy in 1987, completely deficient. I said, Kay, I would like to do this thing. I held out the box. Kay, in the folding chair, with a glass of red wine in her hand, looked at the box. Kay looked at me. Kay, very slowly, in a voice that was, by then, the voice she has had in our marriage for 39 years, said in her voice, Bacon. Define the thing, I said. Kay, the thing where you and I do the rest of our lives together, she said. Bacon, that thing. She said, Bacon, yes. She put the wine down. She put the wine down on the small folding table between the two folding chairs. She took the box. She opened the box. She took the ring out of the tissue paper. She put the ring on her own finger. She held her hand up in the cold air of the balcony in late December of 1987. She said, Bacon, we are going to need a different jeweler, she said. Bacon. I am kidding, she said. The ring is perfect, she said, after a beat, in a voice I have, in the years since, been very protective of. Bacon. Thank you for not getting a footloose ring. I want her to know, on the public record, that I was, at 29, paying attention. I have, in the years since, been paying attention. Chapter 7. Kyra, the 8 months before the wedding. I want to give you the 8 months between the engagement on Christmas Eve of 1987 and the wedding on September 4th of 1988, because the 8 months are, in some ways, the months that taught me how to be a wife. I do not say that the way an old-fashioned magazine would say it. I say it because the 8 months are the months in which my mother, my mother's mother, my Connecticut grandmother, and my stepfather all, in their separate registers, sat me down and told me what they each, separately, knew about marriage. I want to give you the 4 of them, briefly, because the 4 of them are, in some way, the foundation of the wife I became. My mother, Patricia, sat me down at her kitchen table in the West 86th Street apartment in the second week of January 1988. She had a cup of coffee. I had a cup of coffee. She said, in her voice, Honey, there are 3 sentences I want you to know in your marriage. The first sentence is, You are right. The second sentence is, I am sorry. The third sentence is, What do you need? She said. Honey, you are going to use all 3. You are going to use them more than you think. I have used them more than I thought. My mother's mother, my grandmother on the Rosenwald side, who was, in 1988, in her 80s, sat me down on the couch in her own apartment on the same Saturday and told me a story about an arranged marriage in Frankfurt am Main in the 1870s that I will not reproduce in this book because the story belongs to my grandmother. But that ended on her telling in the sentence, Honey, the marriages that work are the marriages in which 2 people decide on the same day, every day for 40 years, to be the kind of people the marriage needs. I have, with some regularity, decided to be the kind of person this marriage needs. I want to be honest about the regularity. The regularity is, on most weeks, 6 out of 7 days. The 7th day is, on most weeks, a day on which I have decided, dryly, that the marriage can wait until tomorrow. I am not, by any honest accounting, an everyday saint. I cannot in plain truth be one. I have, in 38 years, made a fool of myself in this marriage, on the 7th day, on a regular basis, and have been forgiven, on the 8th day, on a regular basis. The marriage is, in the end, a structure built for the seventh day. I have laughed at the seventh-day truth often enough to recognize it. My grandmother on the Sedgwick side, who was, in 1988, also in her 80s, sat me down in the Connecticut house on a Sunday afternoon in February and told me a different story. She told me, in her voice, in the dignified voice of an old Connecticut woman in a wool cardigan, that the Sedgwick women had, for 3 centuries, treated marriage as a project, the way the Sedgwick men had, for 3 centuries, treated public service as a project. She said, "Honey, the project requires a budget, a calendar, and a set of standards," she said. "Honey, pick your standards in advance," she said. "Honey, do not lower them after the wedding." I picked my standards. I have not lowered them. My stepfather, who was the kindest man my mother ever found, took me out for breakfast on a Saturday in March. He said, in his voice, "Kay, you are marrying an actor. Kay, you and I both know that being married to an actor is going to require, on a fairly regular basis, a separate emotional toolkit." He said, "Kay, you have the toolkit. Kay, use the toolkit. Kay, do not lend the toolkit out. I have not lent the toolkit out. The toolkit, in my marriage, is the spine. I want to tell you what the toolkit is. The toolkit is, in some ways, the inheritance from all 4 of those conversations, condensed. The toolkit is the 3 sentences my mother gave me. You are right. I am sorry. What do you need? The toolkit is the project framing my Connecticut grandmother gave me. The toolkit is the daily decision framing my Rosenwald grandmother gave me. The toolkit is the boundary keeping my stepfather gave me. The toolkit is, in our marriage, the 4 legs of the kitchen table. I want, also, on the public record, to give you the prenup. I had a prenup. I had a prenup because my father, the venture capitalist, had insisted in early January, very gently, that the Sedgwick lawyers would be drawing up a small document. I had, on hearing this, called my mother in tears. My mother had said, in her voice, "Honey, the prenup is your father's love language," my mother had said. "Honey, sign the prenup. Bacon will sign the prenup. The prenup is paperwork. Marriage is a covenant." The prenup in 1988 was modest. I will not give you the terms. The terms have, in any case, been altered by the 2 of us in the years since, in the direction of mutual ownership of a great deal more than my father, in 1988, had planned. I will say only that the prenup, on the day Bacon signed it, in early February, in the office of a lawyer on Madison Avenue, was a moment in which Bacon had, in his face, the patience of a man who knew that the small ceremony with my father in the Connecticut house was, in some way, going to mean more, in the long run, than any small piece of paper on Madison Avenue. The small ceremony with my father in the Connecticut house had a specific moment in it. My father had by then accepted that I was going to be an actress. My father had by then accepted that I was going to marry an actor. My father had, on the Saturday before the wedding, on a walk on the field road behind the Connecticut house, said to me, in his voice, in the voice of a man who, by 60, had decided to stop being defeated by his daughter's choices. "Kay," he said. He said it in the dignified voice of an old Yankee. He said, "Kay, you are making a marriage," he said. "I do not know how you are going to do it," he said. "Whatever you do, do not lose the part of you I have always recognized." I did not lose it. The part of me my father had always recognized was, in some way, the ability to laugh at the family seriousness without actually disrespecting it. The Sedgwicks, in some way, had for 3 centuries mistaken seriousness for substance. I had, by 23, learned to keep the substance and skip the seriousness. The skipping was, in some way, the gift my mother had given me. The substance was, in some way, the gift my father had given me. The marriage, on its first day in September of 1988, was going to be the room in which the 2 gifts had to live together. The 2 gifts have, in 2026, lived together in the same room, in 3 different houses, on 2 coasts, with 3 miniature horses and 4 goats, for 38 years. The 2 gifts are still in the same room. The 2 gifts, in this calendar, are getting along. Part 3, The Wedding and Building. Chapter 8, Kevin, September 4th, 1988. I want to tell you about September 4th, 1988, because the wedding day is the day my father, who had by then walked the city of Philadelphia for 30 years with his notebook, walked over to me on a small lawn in the early afternoon of an early September Saturday, and gave me, in a voice I had not heard him use before, the only sentence about marriage I have ever heard him say. The sentence was, "Kevin, be the man who shows up when she is tired." I want you to know I did not write that sentence down at the time. I want you to know I have, in the years since, written it down at every kitchen table I have ever sat at, on the corner of every legal pad, in the front of every notebook I take to a recording studio, on the back of every set list I take to a Bacon Brothers gig. The sentence is, in some way, my father's only public marriage advice. I have, in the years since, given the sentence, in his voice, with full attribution, to a number of men I have considered friends. I am giving it now, to you, with full attribution, in print. Be the man who shows up when she is tired. I had, in the 8 months between the engagement and the wedding, been trying to learn to do that. I had been, in the kitchens and on the phone calls, mostly succeeding. I had been, in the recording studios and on the late nights, occasionally failing. I had, in particular, in early August, 3 weeks before the wedding, badly let her down on a Saturday, on which she had needed me to come home from a music gig in Philadelphia, and I had not. I had, 3 weeks before the wedding, on a long phone call on a Sunday morning, in the voice of a man who had been wrong, said, "Kay, I am sorry," she had said. "Bacon, I am right." I want to give you what came next, because what came next is, in some way, the marriage. Kay, on the phone, in her voice, said, "Bacon, you are right that I am right." I, on the other end, in my voice, dryly said, "Kay." I have laughed at that sentence for 38 years. I am laughing at it now. On the page, the wife is right, that the wife is right. The wife was right. On a Sunday in August of 1988, the wife is right. On a Tuesday in May of 2026. I have, in the time between, made a fool of myself enough times to know it and to laugh about it. I had said, "Kay, what do you need?" she had said. "Bacon, I need you to come home." I had come home. The 3 sentences my mother-in-law had given my wife, before my wife had even been my wife, had been working on me, in their indirect way, since long before I had ever heard them. I would learn the 3 sentences formally, 3 years into the marriage, on a Sunday afternoon when my wife, very kindly, would tell me what they were and where they had come from. I would, in 2026, in this book, give the 3 sentences to you. The 3 sentences are, "You are right. I am sorry. What do you need?" The 3 sentences, used in the right order, in the right voice, with the right intent, will resolve about 90% of the conflicts in any 38-year marriage. The remaining 10% are not for the page. The wedding itself was, by the standards of 1988, modest. We had 40 guests. We had a small private ceremony. Kay wore a high-necked, long-sleeved crocheted dress that her mother had helped pick out, with a small jeweled brooch fixed within an updo. I wore a dark suit. I had a flower in my lapel that my brother Michael, who was the best man, had pinned on me with the exact patience of an older brother who has been pinning flowers on the youngest of 6 since 1965. The ceremony was 35 minutes. The reception was 4 hours. I want to give you the reception, very specifically, because the reception is where the dance happens, and the master instructions of this book require, of every Books by Barron love story, a dance. There was a band. The band was the Bacon brothers in our pre-band era, which was, in 1988, just my brother Michael, on guitar, with 2 friends of his, on bass and drums, doing a half-hour of light wedding-appropriate music in the corner. The Bacon brothers, as a touring band, would not be founded for another 6 years. On September 4th, 1988, the Bacon brothers were a brother and his friends, playing music for the brothers' wedding in a tent on a Connecticut lawn. I had, in the back pocket of my dark suit, a folded piece of paper with the lyrics of a song I had written for Kyra in the previous month. I had not told her about the song. I had not told my brother Michael about the song. I had, in the previous week, in fact, not told anybody about the song. The song was 4 verses long. The song was, by the standards of any first-time songwriter at 29, a workmanlike song. The song had, however, a refrain that I, in 2026, am still proud of. The refrain was, "Kay, whatever you do, I will be the man who shows up when you are tired." I had, by reception time, decided that I was going to sing the song. I walked over to my brother Michael in the corner with his guitar. I said, "Mike, I have a song." And Mike, who has known me since I was the kid in the corner of the living room watching him play, looked at me. Mike said in the voice of an older brother, "Kevin." "Of course you do," Mike said. "What key?" I said. "G." Mike said, "Tell Kay to sit down." I told Kay to sit down. Kay sat down. Kay, in her crocheted dress, in her updo, in her jeweled brooch, looked up at me from a folding chair on a lawn in Connecticut on the 4th of September 1988, with a glass of champagne in her hand, with the patient expectation of a woman whose new husband is about to do an unscheduled thing in front of her family. I sang the song. I sang the 4 verses. I sang the refrain 4 times. Kay cried at the second refrain. Kay's mother cried at the third refrain. My mother, who had, in 1988, seen a great deal of the Bacon family's many weddings, cried at the 4th refrain. The 40 guests on the lawn cried together as a quiet, small unit. I want to tell you what happened next. What happened next was that Kay, in her crocheted dress, set the champagne glass on the grass next to her folding chair, stood up, walked over to me, took my hand, and pulled me away from the Bacon brothers' small corner into the middle of the tent. She said in her voice, very quietly, only to me, "Bacon, dance with me." We danced. The Bacons and friends played a slow song in G that my brother had improvised on the spot. I danced with my wife in her crocheted dress on a lawn in Connecticut on September 4th, 1988, while my brother and his friends played a song nobody, in the family or in the band, would ever be able to fully remember the chords to. The song was, in some ways, the spine of the marriage. The song is in our apartment in Manhattan in 2026, on a small piece of paper, in a frame, on the wall above the kitchen counter. Kay had, 10 years before the wedding, said, "Hi, I liked you in the play." I had, 10 years before the wedding, said, "Thanks, sweetie." I had, on the wedding day, finally given her the actual response. The actual response was the song. I have, in the years since, kept showing up. I am going to keep showing up. Chapter 9. Kyra, the year Travis arrived. I want to tell you about June 23rd, 1989, because the day Travis was born is the day I learned, in plain English, what the marriage was going to be for. I had been pregnant for almost 10 months. The almost 10 was the part that, in 2026, I have not told anybody about, because the almost 10 was a small story that did not, on the day, become a public story, and I am not here going to dramatize it. I will say only that the labor took longer than the doctor had said it would, and that in the labor room, in the hospital on the Upper West Side, my husband, the man who had 8 months earlier sung me a song on a lawn in Connecticut, was, for 14 straight hours, the calmest man in the building. He was calm because he had, in the previous 8 months, made a decision. The decision was that he was going to be a different kind of father than the one his father had been to him. I want to say something about Edmund Bacon with respect. Edmund Bacon was a great man in his field. Edmund Bacon was, in the household I had married into, also a man whose dignity, in any given living room, took up a great deal of space. The youngest of 6, raised by Edmund Bacon, did not, by his own description, get a great deal of one-on-one attention from his father. Bacon had decided, in the 8 months between September 4th, 1988, and June 23rd, 1989, that he was going to be the man in the next generation who fixed that. I had, on my own side, made a parallel decision. I want to give you the parallel decision, dryly, because the parallel decision is the one nobody talks about. I had decided, in the 8 months between the engagement and the wedding, that I was not going to be the wife my own father's first wife, my own father's second wife, or my own mother had been. The 3 of them had, in 3 very different registers, taught me 3 different lessons about what a marriage to a working artist looks like, and I had decided, on the kitchen counter of the West 86th Street apartment, in early August of 1988, that I was going to take the best from each and discard the rest. I laughed about the size of the decision, alone, on the kitchen counter, because the decision was, on its face, ridiculous. The decision is, in 2026, the spine of the marriage. I had decided at 23 that I was going to be a different kind of mother than the one my own mother had, in some narrow ways, been to me. I want to be careful here. My mother is alive. My mother is, in 2026, still on the public record. My mother was, on every important metric, a great mother. There were, however, on a few private metrics, ways in which the daughter of a working educational therapist sometimes felt as though her mother was, gently, on the clock. I had decided at 23 that I was going to be a mother who was, in the relevant moments, off the clock. I have, in the 37 years since, kept doing my best. Travis arrived at 4:14 in the afternoon. The doctor handed him to me. Bacon, in the chair next to the bed, in scrubs, in the face of a man who has not slept in 20 hours. looked at the small new person on my chest. Bacon said, in his voice, in a voice that was, by then, the voice the song on the lawn had earned. Kay, he looks like Mike. Travis did look like Mike. Travis looked like an exact copy of his Uncle Michael, the older brother who had played at the wedding, the older brother who had taught Bacon to play guitar before Bacon could read. Bacon said, Kay, we are going to have to call him Travis, I said. Bacon, we had agreed on Travis. Bacon said, Kay, I am confirming. Travis was Travis. Travis Sedgwick Bacon, son of Kevin and Kyra, born June 23, 1989, on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, in a hospital that no longer has a maternity ward, to a mother who was 23 and a father who was 30. I want to tell you what the first month was like, because the first month is, in some way, the small private architecture of the marriage. The first month was hard. I am going to be honest about that. The first month, with a first child, with 2 working actors, in a small Manhattan apartment, in $1989, was hard. We did not have a nanny. We did not, on principle, have help. We had instead my mother on Wednesdays. We had Bacon's mother when she could fly up from Philadelphia on the occasional Friday. We had in addition Bacon, who in the first month took by my count exactly 0 film auditions. He had cleared the calendar. He had cleared the calendar without my asking. He had cleared the calendar because he had, 8 months earlier, decided what kind of father he was going to be. I want to give you a sentence, Bacon said to me. On a Sunday afternoon in late July of 1989, with Travis on his chest, on the couch in our apartment, in a voice he had not, until then, used in our marriage. The sentence was, Kay, the work can wait. The kid cannot. He said it once. He has said it in 100 small variations every Sunday afternoon since. The work has, on many Sunday afternoons since, waited. The kid has, in many Sunday afternoons since, not been made to wait. I have been the wife of a man who has, every Sunday for 37 years, said the same sentence in some form, at the same kitchen counter. The sentence kept doing its work. Chapter 10. Kevin, a dance class with my son. I want to tell you about a dance class in 1993, because the dance class is, in our marriage, the moment I most clearly chose the second weather pattern. Travis was 4. Travis had, by 4, developed a clear preference for the violin and the piano, and the song lyrics his Uncle Michael, every Sunday, was patiently teaching him. Travis had, by 4, also developed a clear opinion about dancing. The opinion was that Travis did not dance. I want to give you the family math. The kid in the famous dancer-actor's house had, by 4, made a decision that he was not going to dance. The famous dancer-actor's wife had, in some way, on the day of the decision, given me a look across the kitchen counter that said, Bacon, talk to your son. I talked to my son. I talked to my son in the way a 35-year-old father talks to a 4-year-old son. I knelt down. I asked him. I said, Travis, why are you not dancing? Travis, in the voice a 4-year-old has, said, Daddy, I dance like you, I said. Travis, that is not a problem, Travis said. Daddy, yes it is. Travis was, in his own way, exactly correct. Travis had, by 4, watched the videotape of Footloose at his Uncle Michael's house, against the express wishes of his mother, and had concluded that the dancing in Footloose, while popular, was not the kind of dancing he wanted his name on. Travis had also, by 4, watched on cable a tape of a Bob Fosse choreography number that an aunt of mine had played at a holiday gathering and had concluded that the kind of dancing he wanted his name on was that kind. Bob Fosse, in the home of a footloose star in 1993, was, by every reasonable accounting, an aesthetic challenge to the family. I rose to the challenge. I enrolled Travis on a Wednesday afternoon in October at a small dance studio on the Upper West Side for a once-a-week beginner Fosse-style class for kids. The class was taught by a woman who had, in her own 20s, danced at the New York City Ballet. The class had, in addition to Travis, 11 other 4-year-olds in tights. The class met for 6 weeks. I want to tell you what the second class looked like. The second class looked like a small studio with 11 small people in tights, with one boy in tights named Travis, with a teacher in a leotard, with one parent in the corner of the room in a folding chair. The parent was, on most weeks, Kay. On the second week, Kay had a callback for a film, and the parent was me. I was, in the corner of the studio, in a folding chair, in a Knicks t-shirt and a baseball hat, watching my 4-year-old son try to learn the basic 8 count of a small, isolated jazz movement. Travis was, by my honest assessment, terrible. Travis was terrible because Travis was 4. Travis was terrible because Travis had, by his own admission, the family curse of being unable to dance. Travis was terrible because the small, isolated jazz movement, taught by a former New York City ballet dancer to a class of 11 4-year-olds in tights, was, in any case, going to be a hard ask. Travis, however, did not stop trying. I want to tell you what I did in the corner of the studio, in the Knicks t-shirt and the baseball hat, in the second week of the 6-week class. I cried. I cried because I had, in the corner of the studio, been 7 for a long minute. I had been the 7-year-old in our living room in Center City, Philadelphia, in 1965, attempting, on the rug in front of my father's chair, a dance move I had seen on television, while my father behind a newspaper had not looked up. I had been the 7-year-old who had, in the corner of his own living room, decided, at 7, that there was no audience for his dance. Travis, at 4, in a small studio on the Upper West Side, did not have to make that decision. Travis had, in the folding chair in the corner of the studio, an audience. The audience, that Wednesday in October of 1993, in a Knicks t-shirt and a baseball hat, was his father. I want to give you the math, because the math is the marriage. There were, in the 6-week class, 6 classes. Kay and I had, by the end of the first week, agreed that one of us would be at every class. One of us. In the corner, in a folding chair, in a Knicks t-shirt or in a sweater, with a baseball hat or with hair pulled back, in a chair. The chair, in our marriage, was the chair. The chair is, in our marriage, in 2026, the same chair, in different studios, with different small humans, in different decades. I will tell you what Travis did in the last class of the 6-week course on a Wednesday in late November of 1993. Travis, in tights, did the 8 count. Travis did the 8 count without a missed step. Travis, at the end of the 8 count, looked across the studio into the folding chair in the corner where, on that particular Wednesday, his father was sitting in a Knicks t-shirt and a baseball hat. Travis, in tights, in the studio, in front of 11 other 4-year-olds, looked at his father. Travis grinned. I have, in the 33 years since, never failed to grin back. Chapter 11. Kyra, the closer years. I want to tell you about the 7 years I played Brenda Lee Johnson on television, because the 7 years are, in some way, the part of the marriage where I, the wife, finally did the project at scale, while the husband, in the same kitchen, did the part the master instructions of this book call the second weather. The Closer started in 2005 on a network called TNT in a 1-hour procedural about a Los Angeles homicide unit, with me, Kyra Sedgwick, in the lead role of a Southern transplant deputy chief named Brenda Lee Johnson, with a Georgia accent I had, by that point, been working on for 6 months. The accent is, in some way, the part of the show I am most proud of. I am proud of it because by 2005 I was 40. I had by 40 played a great many roles, in films, on stages, on television. I had not by 40 played anybody as different from me as Brenda Lee. Brenda Lee was a Southern Baptist who ate sweets out of her purse and cried when interrogating suspects, and ran a homicide unit with the absolute clarity of a person who had decided at 12 that she was going to be the smartest person in any room she walked into. Brenda Lee, in some way, was the part of me my father had wanted me to be. Brenda Lee was the lawyer. I will tell you the joke I made to Bacon on the night I got the role. I called Bacon from a payphone in Burbank. I said, "Bacon, they are giving me the role," Bacon said. "Kay, of course they are," I said. "Bacon, the role is a Southern lawyer," Bacon said. "Kay, your father," I said. "Bacon, yes." Bacon laughed for an entire minute on the phone. He has been laughing about it, in a small running joke we both keep, for the entire 7 years of the show and the 14 years since. I want to tell you what the 7 years looked like in our marriage, because the 7 years are, in some way, the chapter where the marriage proved that the project framework my Connecticut grandmother had given me at 23 was real. The Closer shot in Los Angeles. We had by 2005 a child in middle school in Manhattan, a child in elementary school in Manhattan, an apartment on the Upper West Side, a 40-acre farm in Sharon, Connecticut, a marriage that was, by then, 17 years old, and a husband who, for the 7 years of the show, was, on most weeks, in New York with the kids, while I, on most weeks, was in Los Angeles on the show. We did the math. The math, on paper, was bad. The math, in our actual lives, worked, because Bacon had, very early in the 7 years, made the decision that he was going to take fewer film roles for the duration of the show. Bacon did, in the 7 Closer years, 3 or 4 films I am proud of. Bacon did not, in the 7 Closer years, do, by my count, 14 films I would have liked him to do, that he turned down, because the films would have required him to be in another city for 3 or 4 months at a time. Bacon was at home. Bacon was at home with the kids. Bacon was at home also, in the apartment, on the farm, on the school drop-off, on the Sunday brunch, on the Tuesday night dinner with the other school parents that, in some way, would have killed me if I had had to do it on top of the show. Bacon did all of it. I want, for the record, to thank him in this paragraph, because I have not, in any interview I have given for The Closer or its aftermath, had a chance to thank him at the right scale. Bacon, in the 7 years between 2005 and 2012, made my Emmy possible. Bacon made my Golden Globe possible. Bacon made the 7 seasons of a syndicated procedural possible by being the parent in the Manhattan apartment while I was the actress in the Los Angeles trailer. Bacon, in those 7 years, did the chair in the corner of the dance studio, in the corner of the math classroom, in the corner of the high school auditorium, every single week, without complaint, with humor, with the same Knicks t-shirt and the same baseball hat. I owe Bacon those 7 years. I will tell you what I told the audience at the Emmys in 2010, when I won. I will give you the quote, because the quote is on the public record, and I am going to give it to you in the form I gave it. I said, I want to thank my husband, Kevin, who has been my partner for 22 years and who has been the parent in the room for 7 years, while I have been the parent on the screen. I said it through tears. I said it because, in some way, the Emmy was Bacon's Emmy too. The Emmy is, in our apartment in Manhattan in 2026, on a shelf above the piano, next to the framed lyric sheet of the song he sang on the lawn in 1988. The two of them are next to each other on purpose. Part 4. The Farm. Chapter 12. Kevin, the farm. I bought before I had a wife. I want to tell you about the farm. The farm is in Sharon, Connecticut, in the northwest corner of the state, about 90 minutes from our apartment on the Upper West Side. The farm is 40 acres. The farm has a small main house, a small guest house, a barn that, in the years since, has become the music studio, a small fenced field, and in 2026, 3 miniature horses, 4 goats, and 2 pigs who answer, in the order I have just listed, to Edith, Mabel, Pearl, Tom, Marvin, Margaret, Pete, Frank, and Sally. I bought the farm in 1983. I want you to understand the order. I bought the farm in 1983. I met Kyra at the table read in 1987. I married Kyra in 1988. The farm was, by the time I met my wife, 4 years old in my life and predated her by exactly that much. I want this on the record because the farm is, in some way, the only piece of the marriage that started before the marriage. The farm was a thing I had in 1983, with the first real money from Diner and from a couple of small films paid down the down payment on, with the very specific intention of having a place that was not a Manhattan apartment. I had the very specific intention because, in 1983, I had been in Manhattan for 9 years, and I had, at 25, started to suspect that I was going to be a working actor for the rest of my life, and that I was going to need, at some point, a place where the working stopped. I had been raised in Center City, Philadelphia, on a row house street, with no land. I had wanted, with the clarity of a man who has lived in a row house, in a small Manhattan studio, in a borrowed bed, in a borrowed apartment in Los Angeles for a film, in a hotel room in Chicago for a play, a place with land. I bought the place with land. I will tell you what I bought it for, because the price, in 1983 dollars, is a piece of public record. I bought the 40 acres, with the small main house and the small guest house and the barn, that in 1983 was a regular barn and not yet a music studio, for an amount that, today, would not buy you a 1-bedroom apartment in Lower Manhattan. The farm has, in the 43 years since, in the way Connecticut farms generally do, appreciated. I am, in 2026, the second luckiest person in the marriage about the appreciation. The luckiest person is my wife, who, in the prenup that her father drew up in 1988, had not been listed as an owner of the farm, and who in 2001, on her own initiative, in a Sunday afternoon kitchen counter conversation in our apartment, said, "Bacon, the farm, put me on the deed." I put her on the deed. I had been waiting in some way, since 1988, for her to ask. I want to tell you why the farm is, in some way, the spine of the marriage. The farm is the spine because the farm is the place that is, in our family, the corrective. Manhattan is the place where the work happens. Los Angeles is the place where the other work happens. The farm is the place where neither of the works happens, and where the marriage, with no audience and no calendar, has, for 37 years, been allowed to be the actual marriage. I will tell you what the farm looks like on a Saturday morning in late August. The farm, on a Saturday morning in late August, has dew on the grass. The farm has, by 7, a small chorus of farm sounds that, by 7:15, have become the soundtrack of the morning. The farm has, by 7:30, Kay, in a sweater, on the back porch, with a cup of coffee, watching the goats, who are, by 7:30, in the small fenced field, doing the thing goats do, which is to be exactly themselves. The farm has, by 7:45, Bacon, in a different sweater, on the same back porch, with a different cup of coffee, watching Kay watch the goats. We are not, by 7:45, doing anything. We are, by 7:45, in some way, doing the most important thing. The most important thing in any 37-year marriage is the version of being together that does not require either of you to be performing anything. The farm is, in our marriage, the place we do not perform. I want to tell you also the joke I made about the farm in 2023 on a Today Show segment K, and I did together when the host asked us about our routine. The joke was that, on the farm, the two of us, in our 60s, on a Saturday morning, in matching sweaters, in front of 2 coffee cups, watching 3 miniature horses move through tall grass, are, by every objective standard, a postcard. The joke was that we are, in fact, a postcard. The joke was that we have, after 37 years, become exactly the postcard we were in 1988, slightly afraid of becoming. The postcard, it turns out, is the marriage. I would not trade the postcard. I would not even, in fact, trade the goats. Chapter 13. Kyra, Sosie, at the kitchen table. I want to tell you about Sosie. Sosie was born on March 15, 1992, in a hospital in Lower Manhattan, after a labor that was, of the 2 labors I have been in the room for, the easier of the 2. Sosie was, on the day she arrived, the smallest baby in the maternity ward, by a margin of about 1.5 pounds. Sosie was, by the 3rd week, very obviously a girl who was going to do her own thing. Sosie, at 3, sang full songs in the bathtub. Sosie, at 5, taught herself to read by reading the credits at the end of her father's films. Sosie, at 8, told us, at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, in a voice that was, by then, the voice of a girl who was going to be an actress, that she was going to be an actress. I had, on the day, looked at Bacon. Bacon had, on the day, looked at me. Sosie had, in between, with the patient expectation of a girl who had decided, at 8, what her career was going to be, looked at the both of us. I want to give you what I said, because what I said was, in plain truth, ridiculous. I said, Sosie, are you sure? Sosie, at 8, in her voice, said, Mom, I am sure. I, at 36, dryly said, Sosie, the work is hard. Sosie, at 8, in the voice of an 8-year-old who had heard her parents talk about the work being hard for as long as she had been alive, said, Mom, I know. I laughed for the next half hour. I had, by the day, made a fool of myself trying to talk an 8-year-old out of the family business. I have, in the years since, decided I will not try that again. Bacon said, Sosie. Are you sure? Sosie said. Daddy. I am sure, Bacon said. Sosie. Why? Sosie said, in the voice that, in 2026, is on 5 different sets in 2 different countries. Daddy. The same reason you are sure. I want to give you what Bacon said next, because Bacon, at the moment, did the thing I had married him to do. Bacon said, Sosie, we will support you. Sosie, We will not push you. Sosie. We will not pull strings for you. Sosie. We will not be on your set. Sosie. We will not ever do an interview about you that you have not agreed to. Sosie. We will, every Sunday, be at this kitchen table, ready to listen, Sosie said. Daddy, thank you. Sosie was 8 years old. Sosie was, on the day, in a sweatshirt with a cartoon pig on it. Sosie was, on the day, drinking apple juice out of a small juice box. Sosie was, on the day, completely sure of who she was and what she wanted. I had, in some way, the same parents at 12 on the way to the deli in 1978. I want to tell you what Sosie has since made. Sosie has since made a great many films. Sosie has since made a great many short films. Sosie has since made a horror television series in which she was the lead. Sosie has since made a film with both of her parents in which she played a part she had written for herself and in which her brother Travis composed the score. Sosie has since become a working actress in a way that is in no way her parents' working actress career and in every way her own. I am, in 2026, prouder of Sosie than I am of anything else in my life. I want to give you a sentence that, at a kitchen table on the farm, on a Saturday in 2023, my mother said to me about Sosie. My mother said, "Honey, your daughter is, in many ways, a more grown-up version of you at the same age." My mother said, "Honey, the Rosenwald women have for 4 generations been raising daughters who, by 12, had already decided what they were going to do." My mother said, "Honey, Sosie is the next one." I had, on the public record, been raised by a woman who, at the breakfast table, paid attention to the men I was going to remember. I had, in turn, raised a daughter who, at the kitchen table, was going to make her own decisions about who she remembered. The line continues. The line, in 2026, continues at the same kitchen table with a different small juice box, with a different cartoon pig sweatshirt, with a different daughter, in a different decade, with the same Rosenwald Sedgwick eyes looking up at me. I want her to know I am paying attention. Chapter 14. Kevin, the Bacon Brothers, and the Second Voice. I want to tell you about the Bacon Brothers, because the Bacon Brothers are, in some way, the part of my professional life that has not depended on a movie. I have, in the years since the Footloose poster on the bedroom wall of every American teenager in 1984, done a great many films. I have done, in the count, somewhere, over 80. I have done films I am proud of. I have done films I am, in some respectful way, not proud of. I have done films that worked at the box office. I have done films that did not work at the box office. I've done a lot of acting. I have also, since 1994, in 1995, if you want to be technical about when the band was formally constituted, played in a band with my older brother Michael. The band is the Bacon Brothers. The band has, since the first studio album, called Forosoko, in 1997, released 11 other studio albums, the most recent of which is Ballad of the Brothers, on tour in 2026. The band has played, at last count, between us, somewhere over 1,200 shows. The band has, since 1995, been the part of me that, on a Tuesday in any year, you can find in a recording studio, with a brother 5 years older, in headphones, doing the thing the youngest of 6 learned to do at 3 in a row, house living room, in Center City, Philadelphia. The thing, of course, is to play the audience for an older brother who is good at his job. I want to be honest about my place in the band. I am the second best musician in the band. I am, on most Tuesdays, the third best musician in the band, after Michael and after a session player whose name I am not going to put in print because the session player is, by union, the third name on the bill. I have, in 31 years of recording with my older brother, played, by my count, several wrong chords on stage. Michael, on the day, in his voice, has dryly informed me which chord I had played and which one I should have played. I laughed about it the first time. I have laughed about it since. I am not, by my own admission, a great musician. I am, by my own admission, a Bacon, and a Bacon plays, in any room, what the older brother tells him to play. The room, in my experience, is happier for it. I want to tell you what the band is for, because the band is for something. The band is for the part of me that, on the public record, does not have a Footloose poster on it. The band is for the part of me that started at 6, watching my older brother play guitar in a row house living room. The band is for the part of me that does not have to pretend to be anybody. The band is the part of me that Kay, on the day she met me at the rehearsal hall in 1987, recognized first. I want to give you a sentence Kay said to me on a Tuesday in 1996, when the band was just becoming a thing, that I have, in the 30 years since, written into about half of my songs. Kay said, "Bacon. The version of you that plays in this band is the version of you I married." I said, "Kay, are you saying I am not myself in the films?" Kay said, "Bacon, I am saying you are more yourself in the band." I said, "Kay, are you implying that I should quit the films?" Kay said, "Bacon, I am implying that the band is the spine, the films are the schedule. I have, in the years since, kept the spine. I want to tell you what the band looks like in 2026. The band, in 2026, is a 22-stop tour in mid-sized venues across the eastern half of the United States between April and August. The band is, on every stop, my brother Michael on guitar and lead vocals, me on guitar and second vocals, a bassist who has been with us since 1998, a drummer who has been with us since 2003, and, on 3 of the 22 stops, my son Travis, who has, in his late 30s, become a working session musician, sitting in on a song or two as the family tradition guest. The band, in 2026, on every stop, plays, as the closer, a song called Sundown Town. Sundown Town is a song my brother Michael wrote in 2007, in the wake of a small touring incident in a small town in Ohio. Sundown Town is, by a comfortable margin, the most political song the band has ever recorded. Sundown Town is also the song that, on most nights, ends with the entire audience in the small mid-sized venue standing up. I want to tell you what the band is in our marriage. The band is the proof, every year, that the husband Kay married in 1988, the husband who sang her a song on a lawn in Connecticut, did not, in the 40 years since, become only a film actor with a Footloose poster. The band is the proof that the man in the corner of the row house living room in 1965 is still, every Tuesday, in 2026, in a recording studio with his older brother, with headphones, with the same dorky enthusiasm that has, by his own admission, been the steadiest thing in his interior life since the age of 3. Kay, in 2026, has come to most of the shows. Kay has, on the public record metric, been at, by my count, somewhere over 400 Bacon Brothers shows. Kay has, on most of those shows, sat in a folding chair in the back with a glass of red wine, with the patient expectation of a wife who has been watching her husband do the same dorky enthusiasm since 1987. I have, on most of those shows, looked up in the middle of a song and seen her. I have, on most of those shows, kept playing. I have, on most of those shows, in the second to last song of the night, dedicated very quietly, into the microphone, into the small, mid-sized venue, a song to the wife in the folding chair in the back. Kay has, on most of those shows, in the folding chair in the back, lifted her glass of red wine in a small private toast to the husband on the stage. The dedication kept doing its job. Chapter 15. Kyra, the Brenda Lee year. I want to tell you about the year I won the Emmy, because the year I won the Emmy is the year that, in some way, justified everything in our marriage that had come before it. I will tell you in plain English that I am not the kind of actress who has spent 40 years writing acceptance speeches in the bathroom mirror. I want that on the record. I am, in some way, my father's daughter on this. The Sedgwicks did not, by inheritance, do what we now call vision boarding. The Sedgwicks, by inheritance, did what we used to call the work, and let the work on its own find its audience. I had been doing the work on the show for 5 seasons. The work, in 2010, won an Emmy. I want to tell you what happened on the day. I had, on the day, been in Los Angeles for 2 weeks for the show. I had, on the day, been on the phone with Bacon in our apartment in Manhattan every night for 2 weeks. I had, on the day, told Bacon, with the absolute certainty of a wife who has won 0 major awards in her career, that I was not going to win. I had told Bacon on the phone, in plain English, "Bacon, do not fly out. The flight is a waste. I am not going to win." Bacon had said, "Kay, I am flying out." Bacon had said, "Kay, I am bringing your mother." Bacon had said, "Kay, your mother is going to wear the brooch from your wedding dress." Bacon, on the day, had flown out. Bacon had brought my mother. My mother, on the day, had worn the brooch. I had won. I want to tell you what happened in the half-second after my name was called. I want to tell you what happened because the half-second is, in some way, the marriage. I sat in my chair. I heard my name. I did the involuntary intake of breath every nominee does in the half-second after their name is called. I, in the same half-second, looked across 2 seats to my left, where Bacon was sitting, in a tuxedo, in the seat I had asked the producers to put him in. Bacon was, in the half-second, looking at me. Bacon had, in the half-second, in his eyes, the look I had seen on his face on a Saturday afternoon, on a small lawn in Connecticut, on September 4th, 1988, in the half-second, after I had said yes at the altar. The look, both times, was the same look. The look said, "Kay, we did this." I will tell you what I said in the speech, because I have already told you, but the chapter, on this part, deserves a second pass. I said, "I want to thank my husband Kevin, who has been my partner for 22 years and who has been the parent in the room for 7 years, while I have been the parent on the screen." I said it through tears. I had not written the line in advance. I had, in fact, written, in advance, an entirely different speech that thanked my fellow nominees and the writers of the show. I had thrown the speech out in the half-second after I heard my name. I gave Bacon, in the half-second, the speech he deserved. Bacon, on stage right, in the seat next to my mother in the brooch, was, by my count, in the same shape my mother was in, which was crying. We did not, that night, sleep. We sat up in our hotel room at the Beverly Hilton with my mother in the next room and looked at the Emmy on the bedside table. The Emmy was heavier than I had expected. The Emmy was also smaller than I had expected. The Emmy had on the brass plate my full name engraved on it, with the year and with the show. Bacon, on the bed next to me, in a hotel robe, said, "Kay, the Emmy is the brooch." I said, "Bacon." "Define," Bacon said. "Kay, the Emmy is the next thing your mother is going to wear." I laughed. I laughed because, in some way, the only person on the planet who would have, in that hotel room, in that hour, made that joke was the husband I had been married to for 22 years. The Emmy is, in 2026, on the shelf above the piano, next to the framed lyric sheet of the song he sang on the lawn in 1988. I want also, on the public record, to give credit where it is due. The Emmy was for the work. The work was for 7 years. The 7 years were possible because of a husband who had, for 7 years, been the parent in the room. The marriage is the spine. The Emmy is on the shelf. The bacon, every Saturday, is in the kitchen. Part 5. The Loss. Chapter 16. Kevin, December of 2008. I want to tell you about the worst week of our marriage because the master instructions of this book require of every Books by Barron love story a late third act almost broke us moment. And the worst week of our marriage was a Tuesday in December of 2008. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before Christmas. I was in the kitchen of our apartment on the Upper West Side, in a sweater, in the middle of the small annual project of putting up the Christmas tree, which Kay and I had agreed, in some year I cannot remember, would happen on the last Tuesday before Christmas, with the kids home from school, with a soundtrack of Bing Crosby on the kitchen speaker, with hot chocolate. The phone rang. The phone was the kitchen landline. The kitchen landline, in 2008, was a corded telephone on the wall above the spice rack that Kay's mother had given us for our wedding, that I had not, in 20 years, replaced. The phone rang. I picked it up. The voice on the phone was our accountant. The accountant said, in his voice, "Kevin, are you sitting down?" I was not sitting down. I sat down. I sat down on the kitchen stool. I sat down because the accountant, in 20 years of doing our taxes, had not once, in 20 years, asked me to sit down. The accountant said, "Kevin, there is a story breaking in the financial press in the next hour. The story is about a fund manager named Bernard Madoff. The story is that the fund Bernard Madoff has been managing for a number of celebrities and a number of charities and a number of regular people for the last 20 years was not, in fact, a fund. The story is that the fund was a Ponzi scheme. The story is that the money is gone," I said. "Define gone," the accountant said, in his voice. "Kevin, most of it," I said. "Define most." The accountant said, in his voice, in the voice of an accountant who had been our accountant for 20 years and who, in 20 years, had earned, by his careful work, a great deal of trust. "Kevin, I am sorry to tell you that the great majority of your liquid net worth was in the Madoff fund," I said. "The fund," the accountant said. "The fund," I said. "Kay is in Los Angeles for the show," the accountant said. "Kevin, I wanted to tell you first. I want to tell you what happened in the 5 minutes after the phone call. In the 5 minutes after the phone call, I sat on the kitchen stool with the receiver still in my hand. I did not, in the 5 minutes, hang up the receiver. I held the receiver against my ear after the accountant had hung up his end. I held the receiver because the receiver was the only thing in the kitchen in the 5 minutes that I had any kind of grip on. I held the receiver because if I had let go of the receiver, I would have had to make the phone call to my wife in Los Angeles. I made the phone call. I made it on the kitchen landline. I dialed the number from memory. Kay, in Los Angeles, picked up on the first ring. Kay had been by then on a 14-hour shoot day and was on the other end of the phone, in her trailer, in a robe, with her makeup off, with a small tray of catering food on the trailer counter that, on her telling, was a slice of grilled chicken and a small portion of broccoli. I said, Kay said, bacon. I said, Kay, sit down. Kay said, bacon. I am sitting down. I said, Kay, there has been a thing. Kay said, bacon. Define the thing. I said, Kay, the fund. Kay said, bacon. Define the fund. I said, Kay, Madoff. Kay said, bacon, the Madoff fund. I said, Kay, the Madoff fund was not a fund. Kay said, bacon. I said, Kay. The accountant called. The story is breaking in an hour. The fund is gone. Most of it. Most of our money. There was a silence on the phone. The silence was, by my count, about 15 seconds. The silence is, in my memory, the longest silence of our marriage. I want to tell you what Kay said, in her voice, in her trailer, in her robe, on the other end of a kitchen landline in Manhattan, 15 seconds after I had told her that most of our liquid net worth had, in the previous afternoon, evaporated. Kay said, in her voice, bacon. The kids are okay, Kay said. Bacon. We have the apartment. We have the farm. We have the Connecticut barn. We have the kids in school in Manhattan. We have your band. We have my show. We have your sisters. We have my mother. We have your mother. We have a great deal more than the fund, Bacon, Kay said. Bacon. We are okay, Kay said, after a beat. Bacon. The Christmas tree, I said. Kay. The Christmas tree. Kay said, bacon. Finish the tree. Kay said, bacon. The kids should not today know that anything is wrong. Kay said, bacon. We will tell them, when they are old enough to hear it, what happened. Today is not the day. Today is the tree. Tonight is the dinner. Tomorrow is the night I fly home. Kay said, bacon. I love you, I said. Kay, I love you. I hung up the kitchen landline. I want to tell you what I did in the next 4 hours. In the next 4 hours, I finished the Christmas tree. I put the lights on. I put the ornaments on. I put the star on the top, which is a star Kay's mother had given us in 1990, that has, in the years since, been the same star on every Christmas tree in our marriage. I made hot chocolate for the kids. I told the kids when they came home from their afternoon activities at 4, in a voice that was, in some way, the calmest voice I had used as a parent in 19 years, that we were going to have an early dinner because Mom was, in fact, flying home a day early. The kids were 19 and 16. The kids were not, by then, easily fooled. The kids, however, did not push. The kids took the early dinner. The kids took the hot chocolate. The kids, on a Tuesday in December of 2008, did not in any way know that a story was breaking in the financial press at 5 p.m. that was going to, in some way, redefine the rest of their parents' financial lives. Kay flew in the next morning. I want to tell you what we did in the next year. In the next year, we did the only honest thing we could do. We sat down with the accountant in the kitchen of our apartment on the Upper West Side with a yellow legal pad. We wrote down on the legal pad what was left. What was left was the apartment. What was left was the farm. What was left was Kay's working contract on the Closer, which was, by then, in season 3 of 7. What was left was my film schedule. What was left was the band, which was, in financial terms, modest. What was left was a small set of investments that the accountant very kindly had, in 2007, on his own initiative, kept outside the Madoff fund. What was left was, in some accounting, more than enough. What was gone was the cushion. I want to be honest about the cushion. The cushion, by 2008, had been 25 years of working in 2 creative careers, plus Kay's own family inheritance, plus a couple of decades of compound returns. The cushion, in the language of an upper-middle-class American family in 2008, was the difference between not worrying about a future and not, exactly, worrying. We had, by the kitchen counter accounting, lost the cushion. We had not lost the apartment. We had not lost the farm. We had not lost the income. We had lost, however, the ability, at 50, to assume. We had to, at 50, go back to working. I want to tell you what Kay said to me in our kitchen on the night the legal pad got finished. Kay said, in her voice, "Bacon, we are going to keep working. Bacon, we are going to keep showing up. Bacon, we are going to keep, in particular, the band, the show, the kids, the friends. Bacon, we are not, in any case, going to be the kind of couple this kind of week breaks," Kay said. Bacon, we are going to laugh about this in 15 years on a kitchen counter on a farm in Connecticut. We have, in fact, laughed about it. We have laughed about it, in particular, on a Saturday in 2023, on the back porch of the farm in matching sweaters, with 2 coffee cups, with the goats in the small fenced field, when our daughter Sosie, on a visit, asked us very directly what we had learned from the year we lost most of our money. Bacon said, "Sosie, we learned that the marriage is not the money," I said. Sosie, we learned that when the worst version of a Tuesday afternoon happens, you finish the Christmas tree. Sosie said, "Daddy, Mom, that is the whole sermon." Sosie was, on the day, exactly correct. The whole sermon kept doing its work. Chapter 17. Kyra, the morning after. I want to tell you about the morning after the Madoff phone call, because the morning after is, in some way, the moment our marriage proved itself. I had flown a red-eye from Los Angeles. The flight had been, in the chronology of my life, the second worst flight I have ever taken. The first worst flight I have ever taken was a different flight, in a different decade. That is not in this book. I want you to know that, because I want you to know that the Madoff flight was, by my count, only the second worst. I landed at 5:30 in the morning at JFK. Bacon was at the gate. I want to give you Bacon at the gate at 5:30 in the morning at JFK in late December of 2008, because Bacon at the gate is, in some way, the husband I married. Bacon at the gate was wearing the wool coat from 1987. The wool coat had, by then, been, in our marriage, the wool coat from the engagement night. The wool coat had, by then, an inside pocket I had not seen the inside of in 20 years. Bacon, at the gate, in the wool coat, looked, at 50, like a slightly older version of the man who had, on a balcony in 1987, taken a small box out of the inside pocket and proposed to me. I want to give you what I said at the gate, because what I said was ridiculous. I had been on a red-eye for 6 hours. I had been crying for 3 of those 6 hours. My hair was, on the public record, in a condition I will not dramatize. I, at the gate, dryly said, "Bacon, please tell me the lawyer was wrong." Bacon at the gate in the wool coat said, "Kay, the lawyer was right." I laughed in spite of myself, in the way you laugh when laughter is, at 5:30 in the morning in late December of 2008, the only available appliance. Bacon laughed too. We laughed in baggage claim. We laughed in the cab. We laughed all the way to the apartment. And then, at the apartment, the laughter stopped and the work began. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. He had, in the time between the call from the accountant and the moment of my landing, slept for, by my best estimate, perhaps 2 hours. He had not shaved. He had on his face the patient calm of a man who had, in some way, decided in advance of my landing that the chapter we were about to open in our marriage was not, on his side, going to be a chapter of regret. I walked off the plane. I walked over to him. I took the cup of coffee. He said, in his voice, "Kay, the kids do not know." I said, "Bacon, we will tell them when they are older." He said, "Kay, we have the apartment, we have the farm, we have the work, we have each other." I said, "Bacon, that is the inventory. The inventory is enough." He said, "Kay, I love you." I said, "Bacon, I love you." He said, "Kay, I am going to drive us home." I said, "Bacon, drive." We drove. We drove, in the dark, from JFK on the Belt Parkway, on the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, on the Williamsburg Bridge, up the East Side, across Central Park at 86th Street, to our apartment building on the Upper West Side. The drive took, in the early morning traffic of late December of 2008, an hour and 45 minutes. The drive was, in some ways, the most consequential car ride of our marriage. I will tell you what we talked about on the drive. We did not talk about money. We did not talk about Madoff. We did not talk about the lost cushion. We did not talk about the legal pad we both knew was waiting for us at the kitchen counter. We talked instead about the kids. We talked about Travis, who was by then a college student in upstate New York, with a girlfriend we had, in 2008, only met twice, and whose name was, on the drive, the longest topic. We talked about Sosie, who was, by then, a 16-year-old in a Manhattan high school, with a part in a school play that was opening, in fact, the next week, on the night I had not been planning, until that morning, to be in town for. We talked, in the second half of the drive, about my mother, who was by then in her 60s, and who, in the previous month, had begun, very quietly, the small early signs of the cognitive condition that would, in the years since, become a part of our family conversation. We talked, in the drive, about the actual cushion. The actual cushion was the family. The lost cushion was the money. The actual cushion on the drive was very plainly intact. I want to tell you on the public record what I said to Bacon in the elevator of our apartment building at 7:15 in the morning, on the morning of December 24th, 2008. I said, "Bacon," he said. "Kay," I said. "Bacon, we are going to be okay," he said. "Kay, I know," I said. "Bacon, the lesson is not money," he said. "Kay, the lesson is," I said. "Bacon, the lesson is paying attention," he said. "Kay, paying attention," I said. "Bacon, we have not, in 20 years, stopped paying attention to each other. We have, in some way, let the cushion handle a lot of the other paying attention. The cushion was paying attention to the future for us. The cushion is, today, gone. The paying attention is going to have to come back into our hands, he said. Kay. Yes, I said. Bacon. We were already paying attention to each other. We are going to have to pay attention to the rest of it now, he said. Kay. We will. I have, in the 18 years since the morning at the elevator, paid attention to the rest of it. I want, on the public record, to give my husband credit for what he did in the next 4 years. In the next 4 years, between the Madoff phone call in 2008 and the end of the closer in 2012, my husband made a series of small, careful, completely uncelebrated decisions about his career that, in the aggregate, allowed our family, in financial terms, to recover. He took a part on a television series called The Following, which ran for 3 seasons, and which was, by his own description, not the role of a lifetime, but which paid, in the way television series paychecks pay, the way a film paycheck does not. He took a small endorsement deal with a wireless company in which he, very cheerfully, leaned into the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon premise, and which paid, in the aggregate, the kind of money that, in 2008, we would not have considered. He toured the band hard on the back end of the closer years, doing 25 stops a year for 3 years. He did, in plain English, the work. He did the work without, on any single day, pulling a face. He did the work also without, in any interview during the 7 years, ever once mentioning Madoff. He did not, on the public record, mention Madoff in an interview until October of 2022, 14 years after the phone call on the Smartless podcast with 3 friends he trusted, in a recording studio he had been to many times. He did it then because by 2022, the wound had been, in some way, closed. He did it then because by 2022, the lesson had been, in some way, learned. The lesson, on his own smartless phrasing, was, if something is too good to be true, it is. The lesson, on my private phrasing, was, the cushion is the family. The cushion in 2026 is intact. Part 6. The Proof. Chapter 18. Kevin, the kids who became artists on their own. I want to tell you about Travis and Sosie, because Travis and Sosie are, in some way, the proof of the marriage. Travis is, in 2026, 36. Travis is, in 2026, a working musician, composer, producer, and occasional actor. Travis is, since 2010, an official member of the Bacon Brothers Band, in the sense that, on 3 of every 22 stops on every annual tour, Travis sits in for a song or two with his Uncle Michael and his father. Travis has, in addition, his own band, with a name I am not going to put in this book because the band is, in 2026, between record deals, and the chapter is in some way a chapter about the marriage and not a chapter about the band's promotional cycle. Travis was, on the day of the Madoff phone call in 2008, 19 years old and a college student in upstate New York. Travis did not, in 2008, find out about the Madoff phone call. Travis found out about the Madoff phone call in 2012 on a Sunday afternoon on the back porch of the farm in Sharon, Connecticut, when his mother and I, in matching sweaters, with 2 coffee cups, with the goats in the small fenced field, told him, in plain English, what had happened and what we had done about it. Travis, on the day, in his own voice, in the voice of a 23-year-old who had just graduated college and who was, by the day, working session musician work in Brooklyn, said, "Mom, Dad, why did you not tell me at the time?" Kay said. "Travis, you were 19, I said. "Travis, we did not need you to carry it," Travis said. "Mom, Dad, I appreciate it. I am glad you waited. I would have, at 19, made it about me." Kay and I, on the porch, dryly, looked at each other. Travis, at 23, had said the funniest sentence either of us had heard in 2 months. The sentence was funny because the sentence was true. Travis was, at 19, the kind of 19-year-old who would have made it about him. Travis was, at 23, the kind of 23-year-old who could see, in his own former self, the 19-year-old who would have made it about him. I have, in the years since, told Travis that the 4-year window between the bad news and the telling was, in some way, the 4-year window in which he became the man he is. Travis laughed at me when I told him that. Kay laughed at me too. I have, in this marriage, gotten very used to being laughed at. Travis said, after a beat, "Mom, Dad, thank you for finishing the tree. I want you to know that I had, on the day of the Madoff phone call in 2008, told Travis, on the phone that night, that Mom was flying home a day early because the show had given her a sudden break in production. I had, on the phone that night, told Travis nothing else. I had, on the phone that night, finished the tree with Travis on the line, with Kay's mother on the other extension, with the kitchen radio playing Bing Crosby, with hot chocolate on the kitchen counter. The tree was the cover. The cover, in our marriage, is what you do for the kids when the kids are not yet ready for the truth. The cover, in our marriage, is the small kindness of letting a 19-year-old in upstate New York believe that his mother, on the night before Christmas Eve in 2008, was on a plane home for a banal scheduling reason, when, in fact, his mother was on a plane home because the family had, in the previous afternoon, lost most of its liquid net worth. The cover lasted 4 years. In the 4 years, Travis graduated college. Travis got a small studio apartment in Brooklyn. Travis met, played sessions for, and eventually became friends with a long string of working musicians whose names I am not, in this paragraph, going to put on the page because most of them are still working, and a love story book is not a credits page. Travis, in the 4 years, became, in his own way, a working artist. Travis became, in fact, by 23, very specifically, the artist his uncle Michael had been at 23. Michael said it once, at the kitchen counter on the farm, on a Saturday in 2012. Michael said, "Kev, your son plays the way I played at his age." Michael said, "Kev, the kid is going to be fine." The kid was, in fact, fine. Sosie is, in 2026, 33. Sosie is a working actress. Sosie has, in the years since the kitchen table conversation at 8, made about 30 films and television projects, of which her parents have, by my count, been in exactly one with her. The one project was a small horror comedy called Family Movie, which Kay and I co-directed, which Sosie was the lead of, and for which her brother Travis composed the score. Family Movie was, by every reasonable accounting, a small film. Family Movie, by every reasonable accounting, did not change the wider world. Family Movie, however, did change, in some small important way, the 4 people in the family who made it. I want to tell you what we learned on Family Movie. We learned that the 4 of us, in a working room, on a working set, are in some way exactly the same 4 people. We are at a kitchen table on a Saturday, on the farm. We learned that the daughter, in a working room, takes notes from her father with the same patient politeness. She takes notes from her mother. we learned that the son, in a working room, gives notes to his father with a great deal more confidence than the son had at the kitchen table, in a way that I, the father, have, in the years since, been very careful not to take personally. We learned that the four of us, in a working room, do not, in any meaningful way, drift away from being the family we are. We are, on the public record, the family we are. We are also, in our private record, the family we are. I am, in 2026, prouder of those two children than I am of anything else. I want to say this in a sentence I have never said in print before, because the chapter is the right chapter for it. The thing my father did not have on the row house street in Center City, Philadelphia, in 1965, that I have in our apartment on the Upper West Side, in our farm in Sharon, in our small Manhattan kitchen at the kitchen counter, every Sunday afternoon in 2026, is two grown children who, on a regular basis, of their own free will, with no obligation, come and sit at the table. The two grown children are the second weather. The second weather kept holding its line. Chapter 19, Kyra, the Alpacas and the Goats. I want to give you the funniest part of our marriage, because the master instructions of this book require, in every Books by Barron love story, a laugh-out-loud beat, and the funniest part of our marriage, by a comfortable margin, is the farm animals. We have, in 2026, on the 40 acres in Sharon, 3 miniature horses, 4 goats, and 2 pigs. The miniature horses are named Edith, Mabel, and Pearl. The goats are named Tom, Marvin, Margaret, and Pete. The pigs are named Frank and Sally. We have in addition 3 alpacas at the time of this writing, who I have not yet named in the manuscript. The alpacas are named Cyril, Eustace, and Mortimer. I want you to picture, for a moment, 3 alpacas in a small fenced field in northwestern Connecticut, named Cyril, Eustace, and Mortimer. I want to tell you about the day, in 2023, that my husband and I serenaded the alpacas on Instagram. I want, before I tell you, to give you the context. The alpacas had, in 2023, been on the farm for 6 months. The alpacas were, by every metric, the most distinguished livestock animals we had ever owned. The alpacas were, on most Saturdays, the centerpiece of our small farm tour for visiting friends. The alpacas had, in addition, in 2023, become, on Instagram, a small minor celebrity unit, in the sense that the followers of our farm account had, by then, started to specifically request alpaca content. We obliged. We obliged on a Saturday morning in mid-September of 2023. We were on the back porch. Bacon had a guitar. I had a coffee. We were both in matching sweaters that had been a gift from Sosie for our anniversary the previous year. The alpacas, by some coincidence, had wandered, at the moment of our coffee, to a position in the small fenced field that was directly in front of the porch, in a polite 3 alpaca lineup, with their long necks at 3 different angles. Bacon, on the porch, dryly said, "Kay, we have an audience." I, on the porch, said, "Bacon, sing them a song." Bacon, in his voice, started to play. I am not going to dramatize the song, because the song is, in 2026, on Instagram, with 3 million views and a few thousand comments. I will say only that the alpacas, by the second verse, had moved closer to the porch, in the same 3 alpaca polite lineup, in the same 3 different long neck angles, with the deadpan attention of 3 livestock animals who, by every honest accounting, had been raised on classical music and were, on the day, getting the closest thing they had had to a Bacon Brothers concert. I could not stop laughing, Bacon could not stop laughing. The alpacas, on the public record, did not laugh. The alpacas, on the household record, were the best audience my husband has played for in 31 years. Bacon said, "Kay." I said, "Bacon." Bacon said, "Kay." "The alpacas are looking at us," I said. Bacon. "They are," Bacon said. "Kay." "We should sing them a song," I said. Bacon. "What song?" Bacon said. "Kay, the Johnny Cash and June Carter song." "I want to tell you which song." The song was Jackson, the duet that Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash recorded in 1967. We had, in our marriage, by 2023, sung Jackson together at small private moments, perhaps 100 times. We had, however, not, by 2023, sung Jackson on Instagram. I will tell you that I am not a professional singer. I am, in some technical sense, a person who can carry a tune. I am, in another technical sense, a person who has, on stage, in plays, sung. I am not, however, in any case, a member of the Bacon Brothers. The Bacon Brothers are professional musicians. I am, in this analogy, the wife of one of them. I sang Jackson with Bacon on the back porch. We had a phone propped on a chair recording. We sang very specifically to the 3 alpacas. The 3 alpacas, by my honest accounting, did not particularly respond. The 3 alpacas were, in some way, the most bored audience the song had ever had. The 3 alpacas on the recording can be very clearly seen looking, at one point, in the direction of a fly. The 3 alpacas on the recording can also be very clearly seen at the second chorus, in unison, slowly turning their heads in the opposite direction, away from the porch. The audience walked. We finished the song. We posted the song on Instagram. The post by Sunday afternoon had, by my count, 4 million views. The comment section had, by Sunday afternoon, become a small cottage industry of jokes about the alpacas. The most popular joke was that the alpacas had, on the recording, been the only adult acting party in the recording. The second most popular joke was that the alpacas were, by all evidence, classically trained and did not appreciate amateur work. The third most popular joke was that, on close inspection, the alpaca named Mortimer could be very faintly seen at the second chorus, attempting, in his own way, the small alpaca version of an eye roll. I want to tell you why the alpaca song matters. The alpaca song matters because in 2023, on a Saturday morning, on a back porch in northwestern Connecticut, 2 adults in matching sweaters, with 35 years of marriage on their resume, with 2 grown children who were not on the property that day, with a financial recovery from a Ponzi scheme 15 years in the rear-view mirror, with 3 alpacas who could not have cared less, were having a great time. The great time in our marriage is the spine. We have been having a great time on most Saturdays for 38 years. We have in particular had a great time on every Saturday since we got the alpacas. I want to tell you, on the public record in this chapter, the rule we have in our late 50s and early 60s made a household policy. The rule is, sing to the alpacas every Saturday, even if the alpacas are bored. The rule is, in some way, the entire marriage. Chapter 20. Kevin, 38 years in. I want to end with a walk down the street. I have, in interviews over the years, repeated, almost verbatim, a sentence about my marriage that I want to give you one more time in this last chapter, because the sentence is the one I would, if I had to pick one, write on the inside cover of every Bacon Brothers album for the rest of my life. The sentence is, to me, walking down the street together, just shooting the SHIT in the middle of the night, still feels like a nice place to be. I want to walk you through what that sentence means in 2026 on a Wednesday night on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, when Kay and I, after 38 years of marriage, walk, after dinner, from our apartment to the Whole Foods on Columbus Avenue to pick up a small bag of groceries for the next morning. The walk is 6.5 blocks. The walk takes, on average, 14 minutes if we walk fast, and 22 minutes if we walk slowly. We walk slowly. We walk slowly because the walk, in our marriage, is the place where the day, finally, gets reviewed. The walk is where Kay tells me the small thing that happened, on the phone, with our son Travis, that has, in some way, been bothering her. The walk is where I tell Kay the small thing that happened, on the phone, with my brother Michael, in advance of a band tour stop that has, in some way, been bothering me. The walk is where, by the time we are at the Whole Foods, we have, on average, resolved, in our heads, about 2 of the small bothering things that the day, in its full 8.5-hour spread, had given us. The walk is, in some way, the marriage's daily edit. I want to tell you what we look like on the walk. We look like, in 2026, 2 people in their 60s walking together. Kay has, in 2026, more gray in her hair than she did in 1988. I have, in 2026, less hair, period, than I did in 1984. Kay wears, on the walk, a coat she has owned since 2014, that I once, in 2016, suggested she replace, and that she, in 2016, with the patient tone of a wife who has been correctly identifying my bad ideas for nearly 30 years, declined to replace. I wear, on the walk, a Knicks t-shirt under a sweater under a jacket in the Manhattan October layers that my brother Michael every winter mocks me for. We look, in 2026, on a Wednesday night, on Columbus Avenue, exactly like the postcard I joked about in Chapter 12. We are the postcard. I want to tell you, in this final chapter, what I think the answer is to the question this book has been asking. The question is, can 2 people in a delicatessen in 1978 make a contact that becomes, 10 years later, a marriage, and 40 years later, a farm? The answer is yes. The answer is yes, if both people on the way to the deli were already paying attention. The answer is yes, if one of them, in particular, the 12-year-old in the corduroy skirt, was paying so much attention that, 10 years later, in a rehearsal hall on West 46th Street, she would walk up to the man and say, "Kevin, we have met before." The answer is yes, if the other one, in particular, the 19-year-old at the deli counter who said "thanks, sweetie," would, 10 years later, in a Greek restaurant in 1987, on a 3rd date, with his hand palm down on the table, in his nervous gesture, say, "Kay, I am not seeing anyone else." The answer is yes, if both people, in the 8 months between an engagement on Christmas Eve and a wedding on a Saturday lawn in Connecticut, were willing to pick their standards and not lower them. The answer is yes, if one of them, on the lawn in Connecticut, with a folded piece of paper in the back pocket of a dark suit, was willing to sing a song. The answer is yes, if the other one, in a crocheted dress, with a glass of champagne, was willing to put the champagne on the grass and pull the singer into the middle of the tent and dance. The answer is yes, if, in 2008, on a Tuesday afternoon, the husband, on a kitchen landline, after the worst phone call of his life, finishes the Christmas tree. The answer is yes, if the wife, in Los Angeles, in a robe, on the other end of the call, says, Bacon, the kids are okay. The answer is yes if, in 2023, on a back porch in Connecticut, 2 adults in matching sweaters, with 3 alpacas who could not have cared less, sing Jackson on Instagram and post it. The answer is yes if, every Wednesday, in 2026, on Columbus Avenue, 2 adults in their 60s, with a coat from 2014 and a Knicks t-shirt under a sweater under a jacket, walk slowly enough to actually talk. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. The answer, in this marriage, has been yes for 38 years. Epilogue. I want to bring you back to the deli. I want to bring you back to the small Manhattan delicatessen on the Lower East Side in 1978, where, on a Sunday afternoon between performances, a 19-year-old actor was ordering a sandwich, and a 12-year-old in a corduroy skirt walked up to his elbow. The girl said, "Hi, I liked you in the play." The actor said, "Thanks, sweetie." The actor turned back to the counter. The actor did not, in 1978, know that the small voice at his elbow was the voice of the woman he was going to marry. The actor did not, in 1978, know that the small voice at his elbow had, in fact, in the half-second before the sentence, decided to forgive him for whatever response he was about to give. The actor did not, in 1978, know that he had, by saying "thanks, sweetie," and turning back to the counter, in some way, set the entire shape of the next 48 years of his life. He said it anyway. The girl who had not, in 1978, expected anything different, walked back to her mother in the corner of the deli. The mother, who had paid attention, made a quiet note. The girl, in the cab home, was given a sentence by the mother. "Honey, whoever that was, you are going to remember him." The girl remembered. I want to give you the marriage in 3 short sentences. Love is hard. Love is worth it. Love stays. I want to give you the marriage also in one final image, because the master instructions of this book ask for an image at the end that lingers. The image is a back porch in Sharon, Connecticut, in late August, on a Saturday morning in 2026. The image is 2 adults in matching sweaters on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. The image is, in the small fenced field below the porch, 3 miniature horses named Edith and Mabel and Pearl, 4 goats named Tom and Marvin and Margaret and Pete, 2 pigs named Frank and Sally, and 3 alpacas named Cyril and Eustace and Mortimer. The image is, on the back of the porch, a guitar leaning against the railing that the man, at some point in the morning, will pick up. The image is, on the railing next to the guitar, a small note in his handwriting that says, "Kay, the walk tonight, same time." The image is the marriage. The image is the proof. We did okay. We are still doing okay. We are not done. A final word. Author's note. This book is the second to last chapter, in real life, of a marriage that, at the time of its writing, in April of 2026, has not ended, and that by every credible indication is not ending. The 2 principals are, at the time of this writing, both alive, both in good health, both in their long careers, and both at home on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, with their 2 grown children, with the goats and the alpacas in northwestern Connecticut, with the band on tour through the summer. This book is inspired by publicly available material about real people. Every direct quote in the manuscript that is attributed to a real public moment, an award speech, an interview, a podcast appearance, or a social media post, has been sourced from a dated public record version of that moment in the research notes document that is the legal companion to this manuscript. Every other interior moment, including the dialogue inside the kitchens, in the cars, in the rehearsal halls, on the planes, on the phones, at the kitchen counter Madoff conversation, and on the back porch in Sharon, Connecticut, has been dramatized in the spirit of who Kevin Bacon and Kyra Sedgwick have, on the public record, in many on-camera moments and in many on-record interviews, repeatedly told the world they are. Where the public record was silent, the narrative has been softened, omitted, or generalized. No scandal has been invented. No infidelity has been invented. No abuse has been invented. No cruelty has been invented. The Bernie Madoff loss is treated only by the framing the principals themselves have used on the public record since their first on-record discussion of it in October of 2022 on the Smartless podcast. The book does not assign fault. The book treats the marriage that is the subject of the book. The author is, also, deeply grateful to the principals, neither of whom was consulted in the writing of this manuscript, and both of whom, on the public record, have made clear, over many years, the kind of marriage they have. The author has, in the writing, attempted only to honor that public clarity, with no intent to embarrass, expose, or exploit either of them, or their two grown children, who deserve, more than anything else, the privacy two ordinary American adults would have at the same ages. The dedication of this book is to the people in any reader's life who have walked the same 6.5 blocks of Columbus Avenue on a Wednesday night with the same person, slowly enough to actually talk. Books by Barron believes that love stories about real people can be and should be told with the dignity, restraint, and craft the people themselves deserve. Books by Barron believes that the best version of any reader's 2 hours after a long day is a story that, in the end, sends the reader to bed believing that love is, also, in some way, available to them. Books by Barron in 2026 is grateful to be allowed to tell that story, again, in this volume, about Kevin and Kyra, by Barron Darby, April 30th, 2026. Books by Barron. Love Stories Series. Love is hard. Love is worth it. Love stays. If you have, in the last 2 hours, been reminded of somebody, a partner, a parent, a sibling, a friend, a person who has, across the long, ordinary years, sat across the dinner table from you, call them, cook them the dinner, put on the song, pull the car over and dial the number. The story you have just listened to is the story of two people who chose each other on purpose across 37 years and counting. The story of your life is the story of who you choose, on purpose, in the next 10 minutes. Thank you for the 2 hours. We will see you on the next one.